Picture yourself living in a world where 15-foot tall giants roam the earth, where supernatural beings openly interact with humans, and where violence and corruption have reached levels so extreme that the creator of the universe decides to wipe the slate clean with a global flood. This is the biblical account of the days of Jared, also known as the days of Noah. But here's what most people don't know. Why were these days specifically called the days of Jared? What made Jared so significant that an entire era of human history bears his name? And most importantly, why did Jesus himself warn that the end times would be as in the days of Noah? Buckle up, because we're about to uncover the complete story of when giants ruled the earth and changed the course of human history forever. But before we get started, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means we can continue producing these types of videos to help you learn something new or pass the time. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's dive in, shall we? Before time took its familiar shape, when the world breathed with different rhythms, there stood a mountain. Mount Hermon rose from the earth like a finger pointing toward heaven's gates. Its peaks touched clouds that had never known rain. Snow crowned its summit in eternal white. In those days, the boundary between heaven and earth felt thin as morning mist. Angels walked among the stars, their duties clear and their hearts pure. They watched humanity from afar, guardians appointed by the Most High. Their names echoed through celestial halls: Shemihaza, Azazel, Armaros, Barakijal. 200 in total, each bearing the light of divine purpose. Yet something stirred within their ranks. A restlessness grew like shadows at twilight. They observed the daughters of men in the valleys below. These mortal women moved with grace unknown in heaven's halls. Their laughter carried on evening winds. Their tears fell like scattered pearls. Shemihaza stood tallest among the watchers. His voice commanded attention when he spoke. "Brothers," he said one evening as stars began their nightly dance, "how long must we remain distant? How long must we only observe?" The question hung in the air like incense. Other watchers gathered around him. Their luminous forms cast no shadows on the sacred mountain. Azazel stepped forward, his eyes bright with curiosity. "The daughters of earth call to us," he whispered. "Their beauty surpasses the light of distant suns." "But our charge is to watch," Armaros replied, though his voice carried doubt. "The Most High set boundaries between our realm and theirs." Shemihaza's expression grew determined. The wind carried his words to every listening ear. What if we could walk among them? What if we could know their world as they know it? Surely the Creator would understand our desire to serve more closely. The watchers exchanged glances filled with longing. Each had felt the pull toward Earth's green valleys. Each had wondered what mortality might taste like. The forbidden fruit of human experience dangled before them, ripe and tempting. "If we descend," Barakajal said slowly, "we descend together. None can walk this path alone." "Then let us make a pact," Shemihaza declared. His voice carried the weight of decision. "Let us bind ourselves with oaths. If one falls, all fall. If one rises, all rise." They formed a circle on Mount Hermon's highest peak. 200 angels, their forms shimmering like heat waves above summer stones. Each placed their hand upon the center, creating a web of light and commitment. The oath they spoke that night would echo through all the ages to come. "We swear by the one who made us," they chanted in unison. "We swear by earth and sky. We swear by the very foundations of creation. Together we descend. Together we will taste what mortals know." The pact sealed their fate like melted wax on ancient scrolls. No power in heaven or earth could break what they had bound that night. The mountain itself seemed to tremble as their combined will pressed downward, seeking the world below. As dawn approached, the watchers prepared for their descent. They shed their celestial forms like old clothes, taking shapes that could walk on earthly ground. Their wings folded inward, becoming memory. Their light dimmed to match the sun's early rays. Shemihaza stood at the mountain's edge, looking down into valleys where smoke rose from human settlements. Fires flickered like earthbound stars. The scent of bread and burning wood drifted upward on morning breezes. "Today," he said to his brothers, "we step beyond our ancient bounds. Today we become something new." One by one, they leaped from Mount Hermon's peak. Their descent began like falling stars in reverse, darkness giving way to flesh and bone. The transformation felt both terrible and wonderful. Weight settled on their shoulders, hearts began to beat with unfamiliar rhythms. They landed softly in meadows thick with wildflowers, grass bent beneath their feet. For the first time, they felt Earth's solid embrace. The sensation overwhelmed them with its strangeness. Air filled lungs they had never needed. Breath became necessity rather than choice. The watchers looked at each other with new eyes. They appeared as men now, tall and strong, but undeniably human in form. Only their eyes betrayed their origin, holding depths no mortal gaze could match. "It is done," Shemihaza said, his voice now carrying earthly tones. "We have crossed the threshold. There can be no return." They walked toward the nearest village as the sun climbed higher. Their footsteps left marks in the soft earth. Behind them, Mount Hermon stood silent, keeping its secrets. The mountain had witnessed their transformation, their fall from grace, disguised as descent into love. The watchers did not look back. Their eyes were fixed on the future, on the daughters of men who awaited them in valleys green with promise. They walked toward their destiny with hearts full of anticipation, unaware that their choice would reshape the world itself. Heaven grew quieter that day. 200 voices no longer sang in celestial choirs. The remaining angels felt the absence like missing notes in an eternal song. But on earth, new music was about to begin. The age of the Watchers had begun, and with it the days that would forever bear Jared's name. The days of Jared begin. In the 10th generation from Adam, when the world was still young and morning fresh, a son was born to Mahalalel. They named him Jared, meaning descent, though none could foresee how prophetic that name would prove. Jared grew into a man of quiet strength. His beard flowed silver like mountain streams. His eyes held the wisdom of one who had watched seasons turn for many years. When he spoke, people listened. When he remained silent, they found peace in his presence. These were good days for humanity. The earth yielded her treasures freely. Grain grew tall in fertile fields. Fruit hung heavy on laden branches. Rivers ran clear and cold, teeming with fish that practically leaped into waiting nets. The climate blessed every living thing with gentle warmth and timely rains. Cities began to rise from the dust of earlier settlements. Stone replaced mud brick. Roads connected distant villages like veins carrying life through the world's body. Markets bustled with traders offering goods from far lands. The sound of hammers on metal rang from workshops where craftsmen shaped tools and ornaments. Humanity multiplied like stars appearing at twilight. Children laughed in courtyards where their grandparents had once played alone. Families grew into clans, clans into tribes, tribes into nations. The earth groaned under the weight of so much life, but it was a joyful groaning, like a mother heavy with child. Art flourished in those days. Musicians created melodies that made birds pause their own songs to listen. Painters mixed colors that captured sunset's glory on pottery and walls. Storytellers wove tales that carried listeners to distant lands without leaving their seats by the fire. Jared watched it all with careful eyes. He served as elder in his community, settling disputes with wisdom that seemed to flow from some deeper well. When neighbors quarreled over boundaries, he found solutions that left both parties satisfied. When harvest time brought plenty, he ensured widows and orphans received their share. His family grew around him like a protective grove. His wife bore him sons and daughters who carried his gentle spirit into the world. His eldest son, Enoch, showed particular promise. The boy walked with a quiet reverence as if he heard music others could not detect. Trade routes spread like spiderwebs across the known world. Caravans carried spices and precious stones from distant mountains. Ships ventured farther from shore, bringing back tales of islands where different peoples lived. Knowledge flowed between cultures like water seeking its level. Languages multiplied and flourished. Each tribe developed its own way of naming the world. Stories passed from mouth to mouth, changing slightly with each telling, but keeping their essential truth. Songs evolved into complex harmonies as different voices joined the human chorus. The art of building advanced rapidly. Stonemasons learned to fit blocks so precisely that not even a knife blade could slip between them. Architects designed structures that reached toward the sky with bold ambition. Gardens were laid out in patterns that pleased both eye and soul. Medicine advanced through careful observation. Healers learned which plants soothed pain and which restored strength. They could set broken bones and deliver babies safely. Lifespans stretched longer as knowledge accumulated. Some lived for centuries, their wisdom growing with their years. But beneath this prosperity, changes stirred like underground rivers. Jared noticed them first in small things. Young people's eyes held a restlessness their parents had never known. Conversations grew more heated over trivial matters. The simple faith of earlier generations began to show cracks. Travelers brought stories from distant lands. They spoke of strange teachers who had appeared suddenly, offering knowledge that seemed too advanced for human discovery. These mysterious figures taught new ways of working metal, creating weapons of unprecedented sharpness and beauty. Jared listened to these reports with growing unease. His intuition, sharpened by years of leadership, detected something wrong in these tales. The knowledge being offered came too easily, required no generations of patient learning. It felt like fruit plucked from forbidden trees. In his quiet moments, Jared prayed to the Most High. He asked for wisdom to understand what was happening to his world. The answer came not in words, but in a deepening sense of watchfulness. He began to feel like a shepherd sensing wolves on the horizon, knowing danger approached but unable to see its exact form. His son Enoch shared these concerns. The young man possessed an unusual sensitivity to spiritual currents. He could sense the presence of the divine in creation's everyday miracles. But lately he also detected other presences, ones that made him uncomfortable in ways he could not easily explain. "Father," Enoch said one evening as they walked together through fields heavy with grain, "something is changing. The very air feels different." Jared nodded slowly. He had felt it too, a subtle shift in the world's rhythm. "The times are turning," he replied. "We must remain faithful to what we know is true." They stood together in the gathering dusk, like father and son united in their concern for the world they loved. Around them, the earth continued its ancient cycles, unaware that its days of innocence were numbered. Soon, very soon, the Watchers would make their presence known. The age of giants was about to begin. But for now, peace lingered like the last light of sunset. Jared's days continued their gentle flow, marked by seasons of planting and harvest, birth and death, joy and sorrow. He remained a righteous man in a world that still remembered how to be good. The descent was coming, but it had not yet arrived. Forbidden knowledge. The strangers arrived on a morning wrapped in mist. They came from different directions, as if the earth itself had birthed them from hidden places. Tall figures emerged from forests where no paths led. Others descended from mountain peaks no human had ever climbed. Still more rose from deep valleys that maps had never marked. They appeared as men, but men unlike any the world had seen. Their height commanded attention before they spoke a word. Their eyes held depths that seemed to contain centuries. When they moved, even the simplest gesture carried an otherworldly grace that made observers hold their breath. The first to reveal himself was Azazel. He entered the bronze working district of a thriving city, his approach silent as settling dust. The metal workers paused in their labor, hammers frozen mid-swing. Something about this stranger demanded their complete attention. "I have come to teach," Azazel announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the workshop. "You work bronze well enough, but bronze is the metal of children. I will show you how to wake the iron that sleeps in stone." The master craftsman, a man whose skill was known throughout the region, stepped forward. "Iron?" he asked. "We have tried to work iron. It resists our efforts like stone itself." Azazel smiled, and the expression held both kindness and something darker. "You lack the proper knowledge. Fire alone cannot tame iron. You need the secret words, the hidden gestures. You need to understand what iron truly is." He moved to the furnace with fluid motion. His hands danced over the flames, and temperatures rose beyond anything the metalworkers had achieved. The fire burned with colors they had never seen, deep purples and brilliant whites that hurt to look upon directly. "Iron is not mere metal," Azazel explained as he worked. "It is the bone of the earth, the skeleton of mountains. To work iron, you must speak to the spirits that dwell within it. You must offer the proper sacrifices." The craftsman watched in amazement as Azazel drew weapons from his impossible fire. Swords emerged that gleamed like captured starlight, Their edges were sharper than any blade of bronze, their balance perfect beyond mortal achievement. Spear points took shape that could pierce any armor ever forged. But why do we need such weapons? The master craftsman asked, though his eyes were fixed on the beautiful, terrible tools. Because others will have them, Azazel replied simply. Because knowledge, once released, spreads like fire through dry grass. Better to learn quickly than to fall to those who learn first. In another city, Penemu appeared among the scribes and scholars. He carried no visible tools, but his very presence seemed to make the air shimmer with possibility. The learned men gathered around him like moths drawn to flame. Writing is well and good, Penemu said, gesturing to their careful marks on clay and papyrus. But writing is just the beginning. I will teach you to write upon the stars themselves. I will show you how to read the future in the dance of celestial bodies. He led them to the city's highest tower as night approached. There, under the vast canopy of stars, he began to point out patterns no human eye had ever detected. His finger traced invisible lines between distant lights, revealing shapes and meanings hidden since creation's dawn. That cluster there tells of royal births, he explained. Those 3 stars in alignment speak of harvests. When the Red Wanderer moves through the House of the Lion, wars will follow within the season. The scribe scribbled frantically, trying to record his words. But Penemu's knowledge flowed like a river in flood, too vast and swift for mortal minds to contain completely. They caught fragments, pieces of cosmic wisdom that left them hungry for more. Learn these signs, Penemu continued, and kings will pay you in gold for your counsel. Merchants will shower you with treasures for knowledge of favorable trading seasons. Women will seek your guidance for the best times to bear children. Meanwhile, Barakajal walked among the shepherds and farmers, those who knew the sky through its practical gifts of weather and season. To them, he revealed different secrets, earthier but no less powerful. The clouds speak if you know their language, he said, pointing to formations that seemed ordinary to untrained eyes. That wisp there promises rain within 3 days. Those towering peaks of white foretell of storms that will arrive with the next moon. He taught them to read wind patterns like written words, to taste the future weather on their tongues, but his lessons went deeper than mere prediction. He showed them how to influence the very forces he described. Certain words, spoken at the right moment, can call rain from clear skies, Barakijal explained. Specific rituals can turn storms aside or summon them to your enemies' lands. The sky spirits will serve those who know their true names. In the workshops where jewelers and artists labored, Gadriel made his appearance. He came bearing knowledge that made their finest works look crude by comparison. Gems that had taken days to cut and polish, he shaped with gestures that lasted mere moments. Beauty has power, Gadriel taught as he worked. Not the simple beauty that pleases the eye, but beauty that captures the soul, that bends the will, that commands desire itself. He showed them how to create cosmetics that did more than enhance natural features. These preparations awakened something deeper, a magnetism that few could resist. Women who used his formulations found themselves irresistible. Men who wore his designs discovered that others would agree to almost any request. Mix these powders under the new moon, he instructed. Speak these words as you blend the colors. Understand that true beauty is a form of sorcery, and sorcery is simply knowledge applied with proper intention. The Watchers appeared in every corner of the inhabited world. They taught the secrets of plant lore to healers, but these were herbs that could harm as easily as heal. They revealed architectural principles to builders, but these structures served purposes beyond mere shelter. They shared astronomical calculations with priests, but these numbers opened doorways to realms that perhaps should have remained closed. Humanity drank deeply from this fountain of forbidden knowledge. The taste was sweet beyond description, addictive in its power. Each new secret learned created hunger for 10 more. Each mystery revealed only exposed greater mysteries lurking beyond. Trade networks that had carried simple goods now pulsed with dangerous knowledge. Cities that had known peace for generations began to eye their neighbors with new calculation. The weapons Azazel had taught humans to forge were already being put to use in conflicts that previous generations would have settled with words. The Watchers watched their students with satisfaction. Humanity was proving an eager pupil. perhaps more eager than even they had anticipated. The seeds of great change had been planted. Soon, very soon, they would begin to bear fruit. But first, there were other hungers to satisfy, other desires that had drawn them from their celestial home. The daughters of men still called to them with their beauty and mortality. Knowledge was only the beginning of what the Watchers planned to share. The unnatural union's spring arrived early that year, as if the earth itself trembled with anticipation. Flowers bloomed out of season, their colors more vivid than any remembered from years past. The very air seemed charged with possibility and danger intertwined. Shemihaza had chosen his bride from among the daughters of Seth's line. Her name was Naama, and her beauty struck observers like physical force. When she walked through the marketplace, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even other women paused to stare, not with jealousy, but with wonder at what human features could achieve when perfectly arranged. Her hair flowed like dark water touched by moonlight. Her eyes held depths that seemed to reflect the stars themselves. When she spoke, her voice carried music that made listeners forget their own thoughts. She moved with unconscious grace, each gesture a poem written in flesh and bone. But Nama possessed more than physical beauty. Her mind was sharp as polished bronze, her wit quick enough to match any scholar's reasoning. She had studied the traditional arts of healing and song, mastering them with ease that bordered on the supernatural. Some whispered that divine blood already flowed in her veins, though none could say from whence it came. Shemihaza appeared to her first in dreams. These visions came with unusual clarity, more real than waking life itself. In them, he appeared as a figure of light and shadow, beautiful beyond description, yet terrible in his intensity. He spoke words that lingered after she woke, promises that made her heart race with forbidden longing. "You were made for more than mortal life," he whispered across the boundary of sleep. "Your beauty deserves immortal witness. Your mind needs knowledge that spans the ages. Come to me, and I will show you wonders that no earthly man could offer." When he finally appeared in flesh, Nama recognized him instantly. He stood at the edge of her father's fields at sunset, his form silhouetted against the dying light. Everything about him seemed larger than life, his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the intensity of his gaze. "I have waited long for this moment," Shemihaza said as she approached. His voice carried echoes of celestial music, harmonies that human throats could never produce. "Will you walk with me?" Naama felt her mortality like chains falling away. This being offered her a love that transcended the simple affections of human marriage. His very presence awakened appetites she had never known she possessed. "I will walk with you to the world's end," she replied. Their union took place under stars that blazed with unusual brightness. The ceremony followed no earthly pattern, for no earthly priest could officiate at such a joining. Instead, the very elements seemed to bear witness. Winds whispered blessings in languages no mortal tongue had ever spoken. Lightning flickered in clear skies, writing signatures of approval across the heavens. When Shemihaza and Naama came together, the earth itself responded. Trees that had never borne fruit suddenly hung heavy with unusual harvest. Springs bubbled up from ground that had been dry for generations. Animals gathered in great circles around their dwelling place, as if drawn by forces they could not understand. The other watchers followed their leader's example with eager hearts. Azazel found his bride among the daughters of Cain's line, a woman whose dark beauty matched his own mysterious nature. Her name was Oholabama, and she possessed knowledge of herb lore that bordered on true sorcery. When she brewed healing potions, they worked with speed that amazed experienced physicians. Armaros chose differently, seeking a bride whose innocence contrasted sharply with his accumulated ages. She was barely past childhood, her beauty that of new flowers opening to spring sunlight. Her name was Betenos, and she carried herself with unconscious grace that made observers think of deer stepping through forest clearings. The watchers courted these women with gifts beyond any mortal suitor's power to provide. They offered jewels that captured and held starlight, releasing their glow in darkened rooms. They brought fabrics woven from threads that no earthly loom could produce, garments that enhanced their wearer's beauty to nearly divine levels. But their greatest gifts were intangible. Each watcher shared portions of his vast knowledge with his chosen bride. Nama learned songs that could heal wounded hearts or drive listeners to madness, depending on her intent. Oholabama discovered the true names of plants and stones, the secret words that unlocked their hidden powers. Batenos found herself understanding the language of animals, able to speak with creatures that had never before conversed with human tongues. The wedding celebrations lasted for days that seemed to stretch like years. Time itself appeared to bend around these unions, creating pockets where normal laws held no authority. Guests spoke of attending feasts where the sun stood still overhead, where night and day blended into twilight that never ended. Musicians played instruments that produced sounds beyond the range of human hearing, yet every ear detected melodies of heartbreaking beauty. Dancers moved in patterns that drew watchers into ecstatic trances, their steps tracing symbols of power upon the earth itself. Wine flowed that had never touched earthly vines, its taste awakening memories of paradise in those who drank. As the celebrations continued, changes began to manifest in the brides themselves. Their beauty, already remarkable, took on qualities that seemed to glow from within. Their voices carried new harmonics that made listeners weep without understanding why. Their very presence began to affect the world around them in subtle but unmistakable ways. Flowers bloomed more brightly in their footsteps. Water tasted sweeter from vessels they had touched. Children stopped crying when they passed, and old people found their aches mysteriously eased. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. These women were becoming something more than human. The consummation of these marriages shook the foundations of creation itself. When beings of heaven joined with daughters of earth, the resulting union created energies that rippled through both visible and invisible realms. Angels in the highest heaven felt the disturbance. Demons in the deepest pits raised their heads in sudden interest. Within days of these unions, the brides began to show signs of pregnancy, but these were pregnancies unlike any in human experience. The women grew at impossible rates, their bodies stretching to accommodate children who seemed determined to be born as giants from their very conception. The changes were not merely physical. Dreams came to these expectant mothers that filled them with strange knowledge. They saw visions of their unborn children striding across landscapes like living mountains, wielding powers that could reshape the world itself. Sometimes these dreams brought joy. More often, they carried undertones of foreboding that the women could not entirely dismiss. Their human families watched these transformations with mixtures of awe and growing fear. The brides they had known seemed to be fading like morning mist, replaced by beings whose thoughts moved in patterns too vast for mortal comprehension. Conversations became difficult as these women found human concerns increasingly trivial compared to the cosmic forces stirring within their wombs. As the pregnancies progressed, the very air around these unions began to thicken with power. Weather patterns shifted, following the emotional states of the transformed brides. When they felt joy, sunshine lasted longer than natural law should have allowed. When sorrow touched them, rains fell that carried unusual properties, healing some ailments while causing strange new maladies in others. The watchers themselves underwent changes as well. Physical union with mortal women awakened aspects of their nature that eons of celestial existence had left dormant. They discovered hungers they had never known, desires that went beyond the simple longing that had first drawn them earthward. They began to understand, perhaps for the first time, why the Most High had established boundaries between the realms. The mixing of divine and mortal essence created something unprecedented, something that neither heaven nor earth had been designed to contain. But understanding came too late for reversal. The unions were consummated. The pregnancies advanced beyond the point of intervention. Soon, very soon, the children of these impossible marriages would be born. The age of the Nephilim was about to begin, and with it would come changes that would transform the world beyond all recognition. Rise of the Giants. The births began during the time of harvest, when the earth groaned under the weight of unprecedented abundance. Crops had grown larger than any living memory could match. Fruit hung so heavy that branches broke under their burden. Grain stood tall as saplings, requiring new tools to bring in the harvest. But these earthly changes paled beside the miracle of the births themselves. When Naama's labor began, the very ground beneath her dwelling trembled in sympathy. Her cries carried harmonics that made nearby animals flee in instinctive terror. The midwives who attended her spoke afterward of witnessing something beyond the bounds of natural law. The child that emerged from her womb measured the length of 3 ordinary newborns. His weight would have crushed a normal woman, but Naama had been transformed by her union with Shemihaza. Her body stretched and adapted to accommodate this impossible offspring. His eyes opened immediately, alert and aware in ways that newborn eyes should never be. They named him Ohia, meaning living one, though he seemed to embody life on a scale that dwarfed ordinary existence. When he nursed, he drained his mother's strength in moments, then cried for more sustenance than any human breast could provide. Cow's milk barely satisfied him, and within days they were bringing him food that would have fed entire families. The other giants followed in quick succession. Oholibama bore twins whose combined size nearly ended her life, despite her supernatural transformation. The midwives who attended these births began to speak in whispers of omens and portents. This was not the natural order asserting itself, but something entirely new entering the world. Each giant child displayed remarkable development from their earliest moments. Where human babies required months to lift their heads, these infants sat upright within days. Their first words came not as the babbling of normal children, but as complete sentences spoken with authority that made adults listen despite themselves. Oya grew at a pace that defied comprehension. By his first month, he stood as tall as a child of 5 years. By 3 months, he towered over grown men. His appetite kept pace with his size, consuming quantities of food that could have sustained entire villages. Farmers began to complain that feeding the giant children was stripping the land bare. But size was only the beginning of their strangeness. These children possessed strength that went beyond their impressive physical dimensions. Ohia could lift stones that teams of oxen struggled to move. His grip could crush iron implements that blacksmiths had labored days to forge. When he ran, his footsteps left impressions in solid rock. Their mental development proved equally remarkable and unsettling. They learned languages with supernatural speed, mastering tongues they had never heard within days of first exposure. They understood complex concepts that challenged learned scholars. Their questions revealed knowledge that seemed to come from sources beyond mortal experience. "Why do the small ones fear the dark?" asked Haya, Azazel's son, when barely 6 months old. "The shadows hold no terror for those who know their true nature. In darkness dwell powers that laugh at the sun's feeble light." Such statements chilled the adults who heard them. These were not the innocent questions of developing minds, but observations that suggested the giant children accessed knowledge from realms that humans could only imagine in nightmares. The giants' relationship with their human mothers grew complicated as the children rapidly outgrew parental control. Naama found herself no longer able to comfort Ohia when he grew angry. His tantrums could level buildings, his tears could flood streets. The loving maternal bond that should have developed became overshadowed by fear of her own child's power. Other families in the region began to feel the giant's presence in disturbing ways. The children's appetites demanded ever-increasing quantities of food, creating shortages that led to hunger among ordinary families. Their play destroyed property and sometimes inadvertently harmed smaller humans who got in their way. When Ohia decided to explore a neighboring village, his footsteps crushed crops and collapsed wells. His playful attempts to interact with human children resulted in broken bones and terror. What seemed like harmless curiosity to him became disaster for everyone else. The giant children formed bonds among themselves that excluded their human neighbors entirely. They spoke together in languages that combined words from many tongues with sounds no human throat could produce. Their games involved feats of strength and endurance that would have killed ordinary participants. They competed to see who could throw boulders the farthest, their contests reshaping local geography. They raced across landscapes, their running creating new paths through forests and over mountains. They wrestled with each other, their matches causing earthquakes that were felt for miles around. As they grew larger, their need for territory expanded proportionally. The giants began to claim regions as their own, driving out human inhabitants who had lived there for generations. They showed no malice in these displacements, treating humans much as humans might treat insects, obstacles to be moved aside without much consideration. Villages that had stood for centuries found themselves abandoned overnight when giants decided to establish their dwellings nearby. The earth itself was reshaped by their presence. Hills were flattened when they interfered with a giant's preferred view. Rivers were diverted when their courses inconvenienced the growing titans. Human governments struggled to respond to this unprecedented situation. Kings who had ruled through strength found themselves facing beings whose power made armies irrelevant. Wise counselors who had solved complex problems through negotiation discovered that the giants operated by entirely different principles. Attempts at diplomacy proved futile. The giants seemed genuinely puzzled by human concerns about property rights and traditional boundaries. To them, the world existed for their convenience. They took what they needed without understanding why smaller beings might object. Some human leaders attempted to appease the giants through offerings of food and treasure. These gestures were accepted with casual indifference, as a man might accept gifts from children, pleasant but ultimately meaningless. The giants' scale of existence had already grown beyond the point where human wealth held any significance. Religious leaders found themselves equally helpless. Prayers that had once brought comfort now seemed to echo unanswered in temples that suddenly felt tiny and insignificant. The giants' very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about the natural order and humanity's place within it. Yet the giants were still young, still growing into the full measure of their supernatural inheritance. Their fathers, the Watchers, looked upon their offspring with pride mingled with concern. Even these fallen angels began to realize that they had unleashed forces beyond their ability to fully control. The earth itself seemed to strain under the weight of these unnatural beings. Weather patterns shifted to accommodate their presence. The very rhythm of seasons began to change as the giants' existence affected the delicate balance that had sustained the world since creation's dawn. But this was only the beginning. The giants were still children, despite their size and power. As they matured into their full strength, their impact on the world would grow beyond anything yet witnessed. The age of the Nephilim had truly begun, and neither heaven nor earth would ever be the same. The giants' hunger. The giants' first taste of blood came during what should have been celebration. The harvest festival in the valley of Chiron had drawn people from surrounding regions to give thanks for the earth's abundance. Musicians played traditional songs while dancers whirled in ancient patterns. Children ran laughing between the booths where merchants displayed their finest goods. Ohia arrived as the sun reached its peak, drawn by the sounds of festivity. He had grown to the height of 4 men during his first year, his presence casting shadows that could engulf entire families. The celebrating humans fell silent as his massive form blocked out the sun. "I hunger," he announced, his voice carrying the deep resonance of distant thunder. The simple statement sent ripples of unease through the crowd. They had heard rumors about the giants' appetites, stories that grew more disturbing with each telling. The village elders quickly assembled every scrap of food they could gather. Baskets of bread, entire roasted cattle, barrels of wine, all were laid before Ohia as tribute. He consumed them in moments, barely pausing to taste what would have fed hundreds of people. "More," he demanded, his tone carrying no threat but somehow conveying consequences that none dared contemplate. The villagers stripped their own stores, bringing family reserves that were meant to last through winter months. Still, Ohia's hunger remained unsatisfied. The festival had become a nightmare of desperate servitude. People who had come to celebrate now watched their future survival disappear into the giants' bottomless appetite. Children began to cry as parents realized they faced starvation in the months ahead. Ohia's frustration grew with his unsatisfied hunger. His movements became more aggressive, accidentally crushing market stalls as he searched for more food. A merchant who moved too slowly found himself swept aside by a casual gesture, his bones snapping like dry twigs. The smell of blood seemed to awaken something new in the giant. He paused, his enormous head turning toward the broken figure. His eyes, previously merely demanding, took on a different quality. For the first time, Ohia truly looked at the humans around him not as providers of food, but as food itself. The realization spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. These beings who had awed them with their size and power were studying them with the calculating gaze of predators. The natural order had inverted itself. Humanity, which had always stood at the top of the earthly hierarchy, suddenly found itself prey. What happened next would be remembered in whispered stories for generations. Ohia reached down with movements that seemed almost gentle, selecting individuals from the terrified crowd. His grip was careful, precise, as if choosing the ripest fruit from a tree. The screams that followed carried across valleys and into distant settlements. Birds took flight in massive clouds, fleeing the sound of ultimate terror. The other giants scattered across the region lifted their heads at the sound. Something in those cries spoke to the darker aspects of their nature, awakening hungers they had not known they possessed. Haya was the next to taste human flesh. He had been amusing himself by collecting livestock from various farms, devouring entire herds as snacks between meals. But the cattle no longer satisfied him. Their blood tasted thin, their meat lacking some essential quality that his transformed palate now craved. When he encountered a group of shepherds trying to hide their remaining flock in mountain caves, Haya experienced the same awakening his brother had known. The shepherd's fear created an aroma more intoxicating than any wine. Their terror seasoned their flesh in ways that animal meat could never match. The transformation spread among the giants like a plague of appetite. Each discovery of this new sustenance awakened similar cravings in the others. They began to organize their hunting, dividing territories to ensure adequate supplies of their preferred prey. Human settlements became feeding grounds managed with terrifying efficiency. The giants learned to maintain populations at sustainable levels, taking only enough to satisfy their immediate needs while leaving sufficient breeding stock for future harvests. They showed the same care that humans might use in managing livestock. Cities that had stood for centuries became ghost towns overnight as populations fled before the advancing giants. Trade routes that had connected civilizations for generations fell silent as merchants refused to risk journeys through giant-controlled territories. The carefully constructed networks of human society began to collapse under the weight of constant predation. But the giants' hunger extended beyond mere physical sustenance. They discovered that human suffering seasoned their meals in ways that simple killing could not match. They began to toy with their prey, creating elaborate methods of harvesting that maximized both fear and pain. Some giants developed preferences for specific types of humans. Mahi's, offspring of the watcher Barakijal, found that the flesh of children carried flavors that adult meat lacked. He would raid schools and nurseries, leaving behind scenes that drove witnesses to madness. The sound of his approach sent entire communities into panic, parents hiding their young in desperate attempts to protect them. Others preferred the meat of warriors, claiming that courage added a particular spice to the blood. They would attack military formations specifically to harvest the bravest soldiers, leaving the cowards alive to spread tales of their prowess. These stories served a dual purpose, both terrorizing future victims and attracting the bold who thought they might succeed where others had failed. The giants began to compete among themselves, not just in displays of strength, but in the elaborateness of their feeding methods. They constructed massive cooking pits that could hold dozens of victims at once. They developed techniques for preserving human meat that allowed them to savor their favorite meals over extended periods. Some learned to ferment human blood into intoxicating beverages that enhanced their supernatural strength. Others discovered that certain parts of their prey, when consumed fresh, granted temporary increases in their already formidable abilities. The heart of a brave man might enhance courage. The brain of a wise woman could sharpen intelligence. These discoveries led to increasingly sophisticated hunting strategies. The giants began to raid not just for immediate sustenance, but to harvest specific qualities from their victims. Scholars were taken alive to schools where giants could extract knowledge before consuming their flesh. Artists were captured to create works that pleased giant sensibilities before meeting their inevitable fate. Human resistance proved largely futile. Armies that might have conquered kingdoms found themselves helpless against beings whose skin turned aside bronze weapons and whose strength could crush entire formations with casual gestures. The few weapons that could wound giants required such close approach that wielding them became suicide missions. Some desperate communities attempted to appease the giants through voluntary sacrifices. They would select victims from among their own people, offering them to the giants in hopes of purchasing temporary safety. These gestures were accepted with indifference, providing brief respite but no lasting protection. The psychological impact of the giants' safe reign proved as devastating as their physical predation. Humans began to lose the fundamental sense of security that had allowed their civilizations to flourish. Children grew up knowing they might be harvested at any moment. Adults stopped planning for futures that might never arrive. Art and literature from this period reflected the universal sense of helplessness. Songs spoke of dark times when the earth itself seemed cursed. Stories told of heroes who challenged the giants, but these tales invariably ended in failure and consumption. Hope itself became a scarce commodity in a world where giant shadows fell across every human endeavor. Religious practices changed to reflect the new reality. Prayers took on desperate tones as believers begged for protection from threats their ancestors could never have imagined. Temples became refugee centers where people huddled together, finding small comfort in shared terror. Some faiths began to fracture entirely. How could a loving creator permit such monstrosities to exist? Where was divine justice when innocent children were devoured by beings that seemed to embody evil itself? Religious leaders struggled to provide answers that satisfied increasingly desperate congregations. The giants themselves seemed untroubled by the devastation they caused. They viewed humans much as humans viewed cattle, useful sources of sustenance that occasionally provided entertainment. The concepts of mercy and compassion appeared entirely foreign to their nature. As their appetites grew more refined, the giants began to demand not just human flesh, but human service. They enslaved entire populations to construct dwelling places suited to their massive size. These projects required enormous labor forces, worked to death and then consumed when their usefulness ended. The great monuments of this era, massive stone structures whose purpose remained unclear to later generations, were built with human bones literally mixed into their mortar. The giants found that structures built with such materials possessed unusual strength and longevity, creating architecture that would endure long after its builders had been forgotten. The earth itself began to show signs of strain under this unnatural predation. Regions where giants fed regularly became barren, as if the very soil had been poisoned by the blood that soaked into it. Rivers ran red for days after giant feasts, their waters becoming unsafe for any living thing to drink. Weather patterns shifted in response to the giants' presence. Some claimed the sky wept tears of rain that never seemed to clean the earth of its accumulated horror. Others spoke of winds that carried the cries of the devoured across vast distances, ensuring that no corner of the world remained untouched by knowledge of the giants' reign. Yet this was still only the beginning of the horrors that would mark the age of the Nephilim. The giants were young yet, still discovering the full extent of their supernatural inheritance. As they matured, their appetites would evolve in directions that would make their current predation seem almost merciful by comparison. Azazel's gifts. In the sprawling city of Enoch, named for the righteous scribe, but now bearing little resemblance to its founder's vision, Azazel walked the streets like a merchant prince. His appearance had changed since his descent from heaven. Where once divine light had radiated from his form, now shadows seemed to gather around him like living things. His beauty remained, but it had taken on qualities that made observers feel both drawn and disturbed. The metalworkers' quarter buzzed with activity that never ceased. Forges burned day and night, their fires fed by fuels that produced flames of unnatural colors. The sound of hammers on anvils created a rhythm that seemed to pulse with its own dark life. Smoke rose in patterns that formed shapes unsettling to behold, yet no one could look away from their hypnotic dance. Azazel had established his workshop at the quarter's heart. a massive structure built to accommodate both his supernatural stature and his growing ambitions. Here he worked alongside the most skilled craftsmen of the age, though skill alone no longer determined who could work beside him. Only those willing to learn his darker methods gained access to his inner circle. Bronze and iron are children's toys, Azazel announced to his assembled pupils one morning as the sun struggled to penetrate the perpetual haze that now hung over the city. Today we work with metals that sing of destruction, alloys that remember blood. He led them to furnaces that burned with fires stolen from regions beyond the earth's boundaries. The heat they produced could melt substances that ordinary flames could not even warm. But temperature alone did not account for their effectiveness. These fires were hungry in ways that went beyond mere combustion. The metal that emerged from Azazel's forges gleamed with properties that defied natural law. Swords took shape that could cut through stone as easily as flesh. Their edges remained sharp indefinitely, needing no maintenance or care. More disturbing still, these weapons seemed to guide their wielders' hands, making even inexperienced fighters deadly in combat. The secret lies not in the forging, Azazel explained as he demonstrated techniques that left his students both amazed and troubled, but in the awakening. Each piece of metal contains sleeping spirits. We merely wake them and bind them to our purpose. The binding process required more than skill or knowledge. It demanded sacrifices that would have horrified earlier generations. The blood of enemies, spilled while the metal was still molten, gave weapons their supernatural sharpness. The tears of victims, collected during their final moments, provided the tempering that made armor impenetrable. But Azazel's gifts extended far beyond weaponry. He taught the arts of seduction and manipulation, showing his students how to craft ornaments that enhanced their wearer's appeal beyond the bounds of natural attraction. Jewelry emerged from his workshops that could bind the hearts of those who gazed upon it, creating obsessions that destroyed families and toppled kingdoms. Beauty is the sharpest blade of all, he said, as he shaped a necklace whose gems seemed to hold captured starlight. A sword can kill the body, but beauty can enslave the soul. Which is the greater power? Women who wore Azazel's creations found themselves irresistible to any man they chose to notice. But the jewelry's influence worked both ways, gradually transforming its wearers as well. They became addicted to the adoration they received, willing to pay any price to maintain their supernatural appeal. The cosmetics that emerged from Azazel's laboratories possessed similar properties, powders and paints that could reshape faces entirely, making the plain beautiful and the beautiful divine. But these transformations came with costs that became apparent only after extended use. The paints contained substances that seeped through skin and into the soul itself. Women who used them regularly found their natural features fading, leaving them dependent on increasingly elaborate applications to maintain any semblance of attractiveness. Some discovered they could no longer look in mirrors without wearing the cosmetics, for their true faces had become too horrible to behold. Azazel also shared knowledge of warfare that went beyond mere weapon-making. He taught strategies that incorporated supernatural elements, tactics that could turn the tide of battle through means no honest general would consider. His students learned to read omens in the flight of ravens, to predict enemy movements through the study of blood patterns, to summon aid from entities that dwelt in shadows. Armies trained in Azazel's methods became instruments of devastation that swept across the land like living disasters. They moved with coordination that seemed almost telepathic, struck with timing that appeared impossible, and showed endurance beyond human limits. Opposing forces often fled before these armies even reached the battlefield, their reputations preceding them like advancing storm fronts. But perhaps Azazel's most dangerous gift was the knowledge of illusion and deception. He taught his students to create appearances that bore no relation to reality, to speak lies that carried the ring of absolute truth, to present themselves as whatever their audiences most wanted to see. Masters of these arts could walk into enemy camps and be welcomed as trusted allies. They could stand before judges and convince them of their innocence while confessing to their crimes. They could address crowds and turn lifelong friends into bitter enemies with carefully chosen words. The social fabric of human civilization began to unravel under the influence of these deceptions. Trust became impossible when anyone might be wearing Azazel's illusions. Marriages dissolved as husbands and wives could no longer believe their own eyes. Governments collapsed when subjects could not distinguish between their true rulers and skillful impostors. Azazel's students spread across the known world, carrying his teachings to every corner of human settlement. They established schools in distant cities, academies where the arts of war and deception were taught to anyone willing to pay the required prices. These institutions produced graduates who reshaped entire regions according to their transformed understanding of power. The prices demanded for Azazel's knowledge grew steeper with each passing season. Early students had paid with gold and silver, precious but ultimately replaceable resources. Later initiates discovered that Azazel's deeper secrets required payments of a more personal nature. Some traded years of their lives, aging rapidly as supernatural knowledge filled their minds. Others surrendered their capacity for love or joy, becoming empty vessels filled only with terrible wisdom. The most advanced students paid with pieces of their souls, trading away aspects of their humanity for power that no human was meant to possess. Azazel watched these transformations with satisfaction that held no trace of compassion. His pupils were becoming something new, beings that transcended human limitations while retaining human weaknesses that made them useful servants. They were his masterworks, more precious to him than any sword or ornament. The ripple effects of Azazel's teachings spread far beyond his direct students. Knowledge, once released, has a way of escaping all attempts at containment. Techniques developed in his workshops were copied and modified by others. Principles he revealed were applied in ways he had never intended. Blacksmiths who had never met Azazel began incorporating blood into their tempering processes, guided by rumors and incomplete understanding. The results were unpredictable but often effective, creating weapons that carried curses along with their cutting edges. Wars erupted over the possession of these supernatural armaments. Artists who had heard whispers of Azazel's cosmetic arts began experimenting with their own formulations. Most failed catastrophically, leaving their users disfigured or dead, but a few succeeded in creating pale imitations of Azazel's work, spreading the corruption of artificial beauty to populations that had never heard his name. The world was changing in fundamental ways, and Azazel's influence touched every aspect of that transformation. Where once humans had settled disputes through negotiation or simple combat, now they reached for supernatural advantages that escalated every conflict beyond previous bounds. The very concepts of honor and fair play became obsolete in a world where Azazel's students held decisive advantages. Religious leaders found themselves powerless against these new developments. How could they counsel their flocks to resist temptations when those temptations offered real, tangible benefits? How could they speak of spiritual rewards when their congregations faced enemies armed with supernatural weapons? Some priests attempted to fight fire with fire, seeking their own supernatural allies to counter Azazel's influence. These efforts rarely ended well, for the entities willing to aid in such conflicts typically demanded prices that made Azazel's fees seem reasonable by comparison. As Azazel's gifts spread throughout human civilization, the foundations of the old world crumbled beyond repair. The age of innocence had ended, replaced by an era where knowledge and power mattered more than wisdom or righteousness. Humanity was evolving, but the direction of that evolution would have horrified earlier generations. Yet Azazel's work was far from complete. His gifts had only begun to reshape the world according to his vision. Greater changes lay ahead, transformations that would affect not just human society, but the very nature of reality itself. Corruption of the earth, and the changes began in places where blood had soaked deepest into the soil. Gardens that had bloomed with gentle flowers now sprouted growths that seemed almost alive, their petals opening to reveal tiny mouths lined with needle-sharp teeth. Trees bore fruit that looked wholesome but tasted of copper and ash, nourishing none who consumed them. Jared walked through what had once been his family's orchard, his aged hands trembling as he touched bark that had turned the color of old bruises. The apple trees his grandfather had planted now produced offerings that moved on their branches, their surfaces rippling with patterns that hurt to watch. When he tried to pluck one for closer examination, it released a sound like a child's scream. "The earth itself grows sick," he whispered to his son Enoch, who accompanied him on these increasingly sorrowful inspections. "It drinks the giant's leavings and transforms them into new horrors." Enoch nodded gravely, his prophetic sight, allowing him to perceive layers of corruption that remained hidden from normal vision. He saw the darkness spreading through root systems like veins of poison, connecting distant regions in a network of spiritual contamination. What happened in one place now affected locations hundreds of miles away. Rivers that had run clear for countless generations now flowed with waters that changed color as they moved. Sometimes they ran red as fresh blood, other times black as midnight, occasionally taking on hues that had no names in human language. Fish died in massive schools, their bodies floating downstream to pile up in putrid dams that blocked navigation and fouled the air for miles around. The corruption affected more than plant and animal life. Human settlements near giant feeding grounds began reporting strange phenomena that defied explanation. Wells that had provided sweet water for generations suddenly produced liquids that burned the throat and caused vivid nightmares in those who drank them. Salt deposits appeared overnight in regions far from any sea, creating barren patches where nothing could grow. Livestock suffered transformations that made their continued existence both blessing and curse. Cattle grew additional heads that spoke in languages no shepherd could understand. Sheep developed wool that cut like razor wire, making shearing a dangerous task that often left their tenders bloodied and scarred. Chickens laid eggs that hatched creatures bearing no resemblance to fowl. The very weather seemed to respond to the earth's sickness. Storms arrived without warning, bringing rains that fell upward or snow that burned like fire. Winds carried scents from regions that no map had ever marked, places that seemed to exist in the spaces between reality's established borders. Lightning struck repeatedly in the same locations, leaving behind glass formations that held trapped screams within their crystalline structures. Farmers who had worked the same fields for generations found their harvests transformed into mockeries of proper food. Grain grew twisted and dark, its kernels containing substances that induced madness in those who consumed them. Vegetables took on shapes that resembled human organs, while fruits developed skin that felt disturbingly warm to the touch. The corruption spread through networks that followed no earthly logic. A poisoned well in one village might contaminate streams hundreds of miles away without affecting anything between. Diseased crops in one field could instantly infect harvests in distant regions, while leaving neighboring farms untouched. The pattern suggested intelligence behind the contamination, as if some malevolent force was deliberately targeting specific locations for maximum impact. Animals began exhibiting behaviors that violated their natural instincts. Wolves formed packs with sheep, hunting together in combinations that should have been impossible. Birds built nests from materials that included human bones and scraps of metal, their songs becoming discordant melodies that drove listeners to distraction. Insects grew to impossible sizes, some reaching lengths that allowed them to prey on creatures that had once fed upon them. Domestic animals proved especially susceptible to the spreading corruption. Dogs that had been loyal companions for years turned on their masters without warning, their eyes reflecting intelligence that was both alien and malevolent. Cats developed the ability to phase in and out of visibility, becoming predators that could strike from dimensions beyond normal perception. Horses grew nervous around humans, as if they could sense changes in their riders that the people themselves had not yet recognized. Some refused to approach areas where giants had fed, no matter how their masters urged them forward. Others would carry their riders to such places compulsively, ignoring all attempts at direction. The plant kingdom's transformation proved even more disturbing than the changes affecting animals. Forests that had provided shelter and sustenance for generations became hostile environments where trees actively attacked travelers. Vines developed thorns that could inject paralyzing venoms, while flowers released pollen that caused hallucinations so vivid that victims often died from the experiences they believed they were having. Mushrooms sprouted in patterns that formed symbols of power, their arrangements creating focal points for energies that normal humans could not safely approach. These fungal circles appeared overnight, often in places where no mushrooms had ever grown before. Those who disturbed them frequently vanished entirely, leaving behind only empty clothes and the lingering scent of decay. The corruption affected the mineral kingdom as well. Precious stones began forming in locations where they had no geological right to exist, their crystalline structures containing properties that made them dangerous to handle. Gold turned soft as clay when exposed to certain types of blood, while iron became brittle as glass under the influence of giant tears. Salt mines that had been worked for generations suddenly produced crystals that screamed when exposed to light. Silver veins developed the ability to move through solid rock, pursuing miners with intent that seemed almost predatory. Copper turned green, not with age, but with what appeared to be infection, spreading its discoloration to everything it touched. Even the soil itself betrayed its former nature. Earth that had nurtured life for countless seasons began consuming anything buried within it. Seeds planted in such ground would be digested before they could sprout, while bodies buried in corrupted soil would disappear entirely within days, leaving behind not even bones to mark their passing. The boundaries between different types of matter began to blur in regions of heavy contamination. Stone grew soft as flesh, while living tissue took on the hardness of mineral. Water could become solid without freezing, trapping anything that touched it in crystalline prisons that allowed consciousness but prevented all movement. Craftsmen found their traditional materials becoming unpredictable and dangerous. Clay shaped itself into forms that its potters had never intended, creating vessels that seemed to watch their makers with expressions of malevolent awareness. Textiles wove themselves into patterns that hurt to look upon, their designs incorporating symbols that caused madness in those who studied them too closely. The corruption even affected the elements in their most basic forms. Fire burned cold in some places, providing no warmth while consuming fuel at normal rates. Water flowed uphill without explanation, defying gravity in ways that suggested the fundamental laws of nature were breaking down. Air became thick as honey in certain regions, making breathing a struggle that left even healthy individuals gasping for relief. Time itself seemed affected by the spreading contamination. Some areas experienced accelerated decay, where wooden structures aged years in the span of hours. Others became pockets where time moved so slowly that travelers entering them might emerge to find that decades had passed in the outside world while they experienced only moments. The night sky reflected the Earth's sickness in disturbing ways. Stars appeared and disappeared without following any predictable pattern, while the moon's phases became irregular and unpredictable. Some nights brought total darkness even when the moon should have been full, while others blazed with light that had no visible source. Human settlements struggled to adapt to these changing conditions, but their efforts often made situations worse. Attempts to purify contaminated water frequently resulted in liquids that were safe to drink but caused other problems. Crops grown in treated soil might be edible but would induce violent nightmares in those who consumed them. The corruption was not merely spreading but evolving, developing new forms and capabilities as it encountered different environments. What began as simple contamination was becoming something far more complex and threatening. The earth itself was being transformed into something alien, a world where the laws that had governed existence since creation no longer held absolute authority. Religious leaders struggled to understand these developments within the framework of their traditional beliefs. Some declared the changes to be divine punishment for humanity's sins, while others suggested they represented attacks by forces opposed to creation itself. Neither explanation provided much comfort to populations watching their world transform into something unrecognizable. As the corruption continued its relentless advance, the few remaining patches of uncontaminated land became precious beyond measure. Communities fought wars over access to clean water and fertile soil, while rulers offered vast fortunes for information about regions that remained untouched by the spreading blight. But these sanctuaries were shrinking rapidly, and there seemed to be no force capable of halting the transformation that was remaking the world according to patterns that human minds could barely comprehend. The Cry of the Righteous. In the quiet valley of Kenan, where morning mist still rose pure from an uncontaminated stream, Noah tended his vineyard with hands that remembered his grandfather's teachings. The grapevines grew straight and true here, their fruit sweet with flavors that recalled the world's youth. This small pocket of creation remained as it had been formed, a fragment of paradise preserved amid the spreading darkness. Noah's wife, Naamah, not the giant bearer, but another woman of the same name, worked beside him in the early light. Her movements carried the rhythm of seasons uncounted, planting and harvesting in cycles that connected her to every woman who had ever coaxed life from willing soil. Their children played between the vine rows, their laughter untainted by the fears that haunted most settlements. "The grapes speak of hope," Naamah said softly as she examined clusters heavy with promise. "Each harvest reminds us that creation remembers its purpose, even when so much has forgotten." Noah nodded, though his eyes carried shadows that had not been there in his youth. He had walked beyond their protected valley, had seen the horrors that giants wreaked upon the earth. The weight of that knowledge pressed on his shoulders like a physical burden, growing heavier with each passing day. In distant hills, Seth's descendants maintained their own communities of the faithful. These scattered settlements formed an invisible network of those who still remembered the Most High's laws, who still offered proper sacrifices and kept the old ways alive. They communicated through trusted messengers who carried news and comfort between far-flung enclaves of righteousness. Methuselah, ancient even among the long-lived patriarchs, served as a living bridge between the pure world that had been and the corrupted age that now held sway. His memory stretched back to conversations with Adam himself, and his presence reminded the righteous that their faith connected them to creation's very roots. "I have seen the birth of nations," Methuselah would say to those who gathered around his fire on cold evenings. "I have watched empires rise and fall like waves upon the shore, but never have I witnessed corruption so complete, nor seen evil so brazen in its assault upon the good." His words carried weight that mere years could not provide. When Methuselah spoke of the world's sickness, even the youngest listeners understood that they lived through times unprecedented in their horror. Yet his voice also carried echoes of older truths, reminders that the Most High's power had not diminished, despite appearances to the contrary. Lamech, Noah's father, traveled frequently between the righteous communities, serving as both messenger and encourager to those who struggled to maintain their faith. His journeys took him through regions where the corruption was spreading, exposing him to sites that broken lesser spirits. Yet he continued his missions, carrying hope like a torch through gathering darkness. "The giants may rule the earth," Lamech would tell frightened assemblies, "but they cannot touch what lies beyond the earth. Their power extends only as far as the physical realm allows. They are prisoners of the flesh they have chosen, while the righteous remain free to commune with heaven itself." These communities of the faithful developed their own forms of resistance against the spreading evil. They could not match the giants' physical power, but they possessed resources that the corrupted beings could not access or understand. Their prayers rose like incense, creating protective barriers around their settlements that even giants found difficult to breach. The righteous learned to recognize the signs of approaching contamination, developing early warning systems that allowed them to evacuate endangered areas before the corruption could take hold. They studied the patterns of evil's advance, noting that certain types of terrain seemed to resist transformation longer than others. Mountains held their purity better than valleys, perhaps because their height placed them closer to heaven's influence. Springs that rose from deep sources remained clean longer than surface waters. Forests planted by righteous hands showed greater resistance to corruption than those that had grown wild. These observations guided their choices about where to establish new refuges. Prayer became their primary weapon against the encroaching darkness. Not the desperate pleading of those who had already surrendered hope, but the confident petitions of people who knew themselves to be heard. Their worship created sanctuaries of peace that extended beyond the physical boundaries of their settlements. Children born in these communities grew up with an understanding of spiritual warfare that their parents had learned through bitter experience. They could sense the presence of corrupted entities before their elders became aware of threats. Their innocence seemed to provide protection against influences that could overwhelm adult minds. The righteous developed new forms of music and art that served as both worship and spiritual defense. Songs arose that could actually repel evil influences, their melodies incorporating harmonies that resonated with creation's original design. Paintings and carvings were created that strengthened the faithful who looked upon them while causing discomfort to any corrupt beings who tried to approach. These artistic innovations spread throughout the network of faithful communities, creating a shared culture that unified scattered populations. A song learned in one valley might reach another settlement hundreds of miles away, carried by travelers who understood that music could be a form of spiritual currency more valuable than gold or silver. The righteous also preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost as the world transformed around them. They maintained libraries of scrolls and tablets that recorded not just religious teachings, but practical information about agriculture, medicine, and craftsmanship, as these arts had existed before corruption twisted them toward evil purposes. Young scribes learned to copy these texts with meticulous care, understanding that each character they inscribed might one day be crucial to the survival of human civilization. They developed codes and ciphers that allowed important information to be hidden from corrupt eyes while remaining accessible to the faithful. Healers among the righteous learned to treat not just physical ailments, but the spiritual contamination that exposure to giant influence could produce. They developed rituals of purification that could cleanse those who had been touched by corruption before it could take permanent hold. These treatments often involved fasting, prayer, and the use of plants that had been carefully protected from environmental contamination. The communities established networks for sharing resources that allowed isolated groups to survive even when cut off from normal trade routes. Seeds from uncontaminated crops were passed between settlements like precious jewels, ensuring that pure strains of food plants would survive even if most of the world's agriculture was compromised. But perhaps most importantly, the righteous maintained their role as witnesses to what the world had been and what it might become again. They preserved not just knowledge and techniques, but memory itself, the recollection of how life could be lived in harmony with divine will rather than in rebellion against it. Their very existence served as a form of testimony, proof that the corruption was not inevitable or permanent. In their communities, visitors could still see glimpses of the world as it had been created to be, examples of what human life could achieve when aligned with righteous purposes. The giants and their corrupted allies found these communities intensely irritating, like persistent thorns that could not be easily removed. The righteous possessed no military power that could threaten the physical dominion of the giants, but their spiritual strength created zones of resistance that limited the corruption's spread. Attempts to destroy the righteous communities often failed in ways that frustrated their attackers. Giants who approached such settlements would find themselves becoming confused and disoriented, their supernatural strength somehow reduced by proximity to concentrated righteousness. Corrupted humans who tried to infiltrate these communities would discover that their evil influences simply would not take hold in such spiritually prepared soil. As the world's situation grew more desperate, the prayers of the righteous took on new urgency. They no longer petitioned merely for protection or provision, but for intervention itself. Their cries rose to heaven like smoke from sacrificial fires, carrying the accumulated suffering of all who remained faithful in an increasingly faithless world. These prayers did not go unheard. In the highest heaven, where no corruption could reach, the petitions of the righteous were received and carefully considered. The time for judgment was approaching, though none on earth yet understood the form that divine justice would take. The Council of Heaven, beyond the highest stars, past the boundaries where mortal minds could reach, the throne of the Most High blazed with light that gave birth to all other illumination. Here, in realms where time moved according to different laws, the Heavenly Council convened to address the crisis spreading across the earth below. The four living creatures surrounded the throne in their eternal positions, their many eyes reflecting every event that had transpired since creation's dawn. The lion's gaze held the fury of divine justice awakening. The eagle watched with the piercing vision that missed no detail of corruption or righteousness. The man's face showed sorrow for the suffering of innocent souls. The ox bore the patient strength that would be needed for what was to come. Seraphim hovered above the throne with wings that covered their faces before the divine presence, their voices joining in songs that had never ceased since the moment of their creation. But even their perfect harmonies carried new notes of mourning for a world that had strayed so far from its intended purpose. The archangels stood in formation before the throne, their forms radiating power that could reshape mountains or level cities with a word. Michael, captain of heaven's hosts, bore armor that gleamed with the light of 1,000 suns. Gabriel carried messages written in fire across scrolls that contained the very words of the Almighty. Raphael held instruments of healing that could restore not just bodies, but entire nations to wholeness. Uriel's sword burned with flames that could consume the deepest corruption. Speak, came the voice from the throne, a sound that contained all music and all silence, all words and all meaning. Tell us what you have witnessed upon the earth. Michael stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic authority. The Watchers have violated every boundary you established. They have taken flesh and fathered children whose very existence corrupts creation itself. The giants devour humanity as beasts devour grass, showing no mercy or restraint. Gabriel raised the scroll of testimonies, its surface burning with the recorded cries of the suffering. The prayers of the righteous reach us day and night. The blood of innocence soaks the earth until the ground itself cries out for justice. The corruption spreads like poison through water, contaminating everything it touches. Raphael's healing instruments resonated with the pain of a wounded world. The very fabric of creation grows sick. Plants and animals transform into abominations. The elements themselves rebel against their natural order. What you made good has been twisted into evil beyond recognition. Uriel's flaming sword pulsed with each word he spoke. The knowledge given by the Watchers has armed humanity with power they were not meant to possess. They create weapons of supernatural destruction, practice sorceries that open doorways to forbidden realms, and use their enhanced abilities to increase rather than diminish suffering. Around the throne, the 24 elders who represented all of creation's faithful across time and space lowered their golden crowns in acknowledgement of the reports. Their presence spoke for every righteous soul that had ever lived, every voice that had cried out for divine intervention in times of darkness. The Ancient of Days considered the testimonies with perfect wisdom that encompassed all possibilities and their consequences. His thoughts moved across time like winds across still water, seeing not just what was, but what would be, not just the immediate crisis, but its ultimate resolution. The covenant with Noah's line will stand, the voice from the throne declared, its words creating ripples through the spiritual realm that would eventually manifest as physical reality. But first, judgment must fall upon those who have corrupted my creation. The court of heaven stirred as divine decisions took shape. These were not hasty judgments born of anger, but carefully considered responses to corruption that threatened the very foundations of existence. Each word spoken from the throne would reshape reality according to divine will. Let the Watchers be bound, the Almighty declared, his voice resonating through dimensions both seen and unseen. Their freedom has become license for evil. Their knowledge has become a weapon against the innocent. They shall be imprisoned until the day of final judgment. Michael's armor blazed brighter as he received his commission. It shall be done, Lord. The fallen ones will taste the bonds they have earned through their rebellion. Let the giants perish, continued the divine voice, each word falling like thunder that shook the foundations of heaven itself. Their strength serves only destruction. Their appetites know no bounds. The earth groans under their weight, and the cries of their victims reach our very throne. Gabriel's scroll unfurled further, revealing instructions written in flames that would never be extinguished. What of humanity, Lord? Many have been corrupted by the Watcher's gifts, but others remain faithful despite the darkness surrounding them. "The righteous will be preserved," came the reply, accompanied by light that made the sun seem dim by comparison. "One family will carry the seed of new beginning. Through them, the world will be cleansed and restored." The council members bowed their heads as the magnitude of what was being decreed became clear. This would not be simple punishment, but complete renewal, a washing away of corruption so thorough that only those specially protected could survive. Raphael stepped forward, his healing nature making him the advocate for mercy, even in the face of necessary judgment. "The innocent among humanity number more than the guilty, Lord. Many have been led astray through deception rather than willing rebellion." "And for their sake," the throne replied with infinite compassion, "warning will be given. Time will be granted for repentance, but those who continue in corruption after receiving truth will face the consequences of their choices." Uriel's sword pulsed with anticipation of the battles to come. "When shall this judgment begin, Lord? The earth's suffering increases with each passing day." "First, let our servant Enoch walk among them," the Almighty commanded. "Let him bear witness to both the righteous and the corrupted. Let him record what he sees for generations yet to come. His testimony will serve as both warning and promise." The seraphim's songs took on new harmonies as they proclaimed the justice and mercy that would soon be revealed. Their voices wove together truths that human language could not contain, melodies that spoke of endings that were also beginnings, of destruction that served the purposes of ultimate creation. Around the throne, the representatives of creation itself, the elements, the seasons, the very forces that maintained physical reality, prepared to receive new instructions. They would soon be called upon to serve justice in ways that would demonstrate divine power beyond any doubt. The living creatures turned their many eyes toward earth, their gaze penetrating through layers of spiritual and physical reality to observe every detail of the corruption below. Nothing escaped their notice, not the secret feeding grounds where giants gorged themselves on human flesh, not the hidden workshops where Azazel's students practiced their dark arts, not the quiet valleys where the righteous maintained their faithful vigil. "Let the elements themselves become instruments of purification," the divine voice declared. "Let water rise beyond its bounds to wash away the stains of corruption. Let the foundations of the earth shake to remind all that we are the ultimate authority. Let the very heavens open to demonstrate that no power can stand against divine justice." The archangels received their specific assignments with perfect understanding. Each would play a role in the coming judgment, their actions coordinated with precision that left no room for error or mercy for the unrepentant. Michael would lead the assault against the Watchers themselves, his sword cleaving through their supernatural defenses as if they were morning mist. Gabriel would carry warnings to the righteous, ensuring that those who deserved preservation received guidance for their protection. Raphael would oversee the healing of creation itself, preparing the earth for its eventual restoration. Uriel would kindle the fires of judgment that would consume corruption root and branch. But remember, the throne spoke with infinite love underlying infinite justice, that even in judgment, we do not cease to love that which we created. The purpose of this cleansing is not destruction for its own sake, but the restoration of goodness that has been perverted by evil choices. The heavenly court understood that what was about to unfold on earth would seem harsh to mortal perception, but from the eternal perspective, it represented the ultimate act of mercy. To allow corruption to continue unchecked would be to permit the complete destruction of everything good and beautiful in creation. The decision had been made with perfect wisdom that took into account every possible consequence. The judgment would be thorough, but not random, devastating, but not without purpose, final, but not without hope for those who chose righteousness over rebellion. As the council session drew toward its close, each member of the heavenly host received their specific roles in the coming intervention. Angels who had served as guardians would become warriors. Messengers would carry ultimatums rather than simple communications. The very forces of nature would be transformed from servants of life into instruments of purification. Yet through all these preparations for judgment, The underlying theme remained one of love seeking to restore rather than merely to punish. The corruption had to be removed so that goodness could flourish again. The giants had to perish so that humanity could survive. The Watchers had to be bound so that creation could return to its intended patterns. The plans that emerged from this heavenly council would reshape not just the physical world, but the very nature of existence itself. Future generations would know that the Most High remained sovereign over all creation, that divine justice could not be evaded indefinitely, and that mercy always accompanied judgment for those who chose to receive it. As the archangels prepared to depart for their earthly missions, the throne spoke final words that would echo through eternity. Let all creation know that we are God, and besides us there is no other. Let the righteous take comfort, and let the wicked tremble. The time of reckoning has come. The heavenly council dissolved as its members took their positions for the great work ahead. Soon, very soon, the earth would witness divine intervention on a scale not seen since creation itself. The age of corruption was drawing to its close, though few on earth yet understood how complete that ending would be. Enoch's mission. In the highest reaches of heaven, where light itself bows in reverence, a decision echoes through eternity. The cries of the earth have reached the throne. Blood soaks the ground. Giants feast on human flesh. The Watchers mock their Creator with every breath. God calls forth a man, not a warrior, not a king, a scribe. Enoch walks with God each day at twilight. His steps match the rhythm of divine heartbeats. His eyes see beyond the veil that blinds other mortals. When heaven speaks, Enoch listens. When heaven weeps, Enoch feels each tear. The Lord's voice carries the weight of coming judgment. Go to the Watchers who have left their first estate. Tell them what awaits. Their time of mercy ends. Enoch nods. His beard, white as mountain snow, catches the fading light. He has seen the giants' atrocities. He has watched mothers weep over devoured children. He has witnessed the earth itself cry out in anguish. The journey begins at dawn. Enoch's feet carry him across valleys where normal men fear to tread. His path leads toward Mount Hermon, where the Watchers first descended. The air grows thick with supernatural dread. Even the birds fall silent here. As he walks, visions flood his mind. He sees the original rebellion. 200 angels standing in a circle, hands joined, voices united in blasphemous oath. Shemihaza's words still echo across the peaks. Let us all swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan. They thought their numbers brought safety. They believed their unity made them strong. They forgot that heaven sees all. Enoch passes the ruins of human settlements, stones scattered like broken teeth, wells filled with ash and bone. The giants' hunger leaves nothing whole. Their appetites grow with each passing season. First they consume the harvest, then the livestock. Now they feast on human flesh without shame. The mountain looms ahead. Ancient cedars twist toward the sky like gnarled fingers. Their branches whisper secrets older than human memory. Here, in this sacred place, the Watchers broke heaven's laws. Here they chose lust over loyalty. Enoch climbs steadily. His breath comes easy despite the thin air. Divine strength fills his aging limbs. Each step brings him closer to a confrontation that will shake the foundations of the world. The Watchers sense his approach. Their supernatural forms ripple with anxiety. They remember this man. They know his reputation. Enoch the scribe. Enoch the righteous. Enoch who walks with God. Shemihaza emerges from the shadows first. His beauty remains stunning despite his fall. Wings like burnished copper catch the morning light. Eyes that once reflected heaven's glory now burn with desperate hunger. He wears the face of an angel, but corruption seeps from every pore. Enoch, he says. His voice carries the music of creation itself, now twisted into minor keys. Why do you climb our mountain? What business brings the righteous to our domain? The other Watchers gather. Azazel skulks behind stone outcropping, his hands still stained with the blood of his latest teachings. Barakel hovers near the tree line, starlight dripping from his fingertips like poison. Kokabel watches from above, his knowledge of the constellations now turned to dark purposes. They know. Deep in their fallen hearts, they know why Enoch has come. I bring words from the throne, Enoch says. His voice carries no fear, only sadness. The Most High has seen your deeds. He has heard the earth's cry. Judgment comes. The Watchers recoil as if struck. Some take flight, circling overhead like vultures. Others press closer, desperate to hear more. Their immortal faces show the first taste of true terror. Enoch reaches into his robes, his fingers close around a scroll sealed with heaven's authority. The parchment glows with inner light. Divine words burn across its surface in letters of fire. Your Creator speaks. Enoch begins. You were made to guard the throne. Instead, you abandoned your posts. You were called to serve creation. Instead, you corrupted it. You were meant to be examples of holiness. Instead, you became teachers of sin. Each word strikes like a hammer blow. The fallen angels writhe as if in physical pain. Truth cuts deeper than any blade. Their rebellion stands exposed in the light of divine justice. Shemihaza falls to his knees. His magnificent wings drag in the dust. We sought only to help mankind, he pleads. We saw their weakness. We wanted to make them strong. Enoch's eyes fill with gentle sorrow. You saw their innocence and chose to steal it. You watched their wonder and decided to exploit it. Love gives freely. Lust takes everything. The scroll unfurls in Enoch's hands. Heaven's judgment blazes forth in words of liquid flame. The Watcher's fate spreads before them like an unrolling carpet of doom. You will be bound, Enoch reads. Chains of darkness will hold you until the great day of judgment. Your children, the giants, will destroy each other. Their spirits will wander the earth as demons. No peace will you find. No rest will you know. Lightning splits the sky. Thunder rolls across the peaks. The mountain itself seems to tremble at heaven's pronouncement. The Watcher's cries echo across the valleys below, a sound of anguish that will haunt these hills for generations. But the judgment has only begun. Enoch and the giants. The giants sense his coming long before human eyes could spot him. Their supernatural heritage gifts them with senses beyond mortal understanding. They smell righteousness on the wind like others might detect smoke. They taste judgment in the very air. Enoch descends from Mount Hermon carrying heaven's authority like a cloak of invisible fire. His mission extends beyond the fallen Watchers. The children of corruption must also hear their fate. The giants who tower over human cities must learn that even their great strength cannot stand against divine will. The first giant he encounters stands guard over a human settlement. Og towers 30 cubits high, his shadow falling across entire households. His armor gleams like burnished bronze. His spear could pierce the walls of fortresses. Human warriors flee at the sound of his footsteps. Yet when Og sees the small, white-bearded man approaching, something ancient and terrible stirs in his supernatural blood. Old man, Og rumbles, his voice like distant thunder. Turn back! This place belongs to the sons of the Watchers. Mortals are not welcome here unless they come bearing tribute. Enoch continues walking. His steps never falter. His gaze remains fixed on the giant's face. I bring no tribute except truth. I offer no gifts except warning. Og laughs. The sound shakes leaves from nearby trees. Birds take flight in panic. Truth? Warning? What can a withered human offer to one like me? I am the son of gods. I feast on armies. I break mountains with my hands. Your fathers taught you pride, Enoch says softly. They forgot to teach you wisdom. The giant's laughter dies. Something in the old man's tone sends ice through his superhuman veins. Og has fought dragons and emerged victorious. He has wrestled with demons and won. But this frail human radiates a power that makes his warrior's heart flutter with unfamiliar fear. Enoch reaches into his robes. The scroll appears in his hands as still glowing with heaven's light. Divine words burn across its surface like captured starfire. Your Creator speaks, child of rebellion. Listen and tremble. The scroll unrolls. Words of judgment blaze forth in letters of living flame. Og staggers backward as if struck by invisible hammers. His great strength means nothing against the weight of divine pronouncement. Your days are numbered, Enoch reads. Your strength will fail. Your appetite will become your destruction. Brother will rise against brother. Blood will flow like rivers. None of your kind will see the new world that comes after the cleansing. Og's massive hands clench into fists that could shatter boulders. You lie, old man. We are immortal. We are the children of angels. Death cannot touch us. Death already fills your heart, Enoch replies. You feast on human flesh, but hunger never leaves you. You drain the earth's resources, but thirst never ends. You spread violence everywhere you walk, but peace remains forever beyond your reach. The giant raises his spear. Its bronze point gleams like a fallen star. One thrust could end the old man's life. One blow could silence his troubling words forever. But the weapon will not move. Og strains against invisible bonds. His superhuman muscles bulge with effort. Sweat beads on his massive forehead. The spear might as well be rooted in the earth itself. Your strength comes from your fathers, Enoch explains. But your fathers now face judgment. Their power flows away like water through broken vessels. Soon you will stand alone. Terror creeps into the giant's eyes. For the first time in his long existence, Og feels truly afraid. Not the excitement of battle or the thrill of danger. Pure, cold fear that reaches into his soul like winter wind. Other giants emerge from the shadows. They have heard their brothers struggle. They come expecting to find him crushing another weak human. Instead, they discover Og frozen in place, unable to harm a small, elderly man. Goliath stalks forward, his steps making the earth tremble. His brothers follow. Anak, with his bronze skin and golden hair, Zuzum, whose eyes burn like coals, Emim, whose voice can shatter stone. They represent the mightiest of their race. They command armies of lesser giants. Human kingdoms fall before their advance like wheat before the scythe. What sorcery is this? Goliath demands. His voice carries the authority of one accustomed to instant obedience. Release our brother, old man, or face our wrath. Enoch turns to face them all. His small frame seems dwarfed by their towering presence, yet something in his bearing makes even these titans hesitate. Divine authority radiates from him like heat from a forge. I bind no one, Enoch says. Your brother discovers the weakness that was always in his heart. Power built on rebellion cannot stand against truth. The scroll in his hands unfurls further. New words appear, written in flames that hurt the giant's eyes to behold. Their judgment spreads before them like an unrolling map of doom. You were born from forbidden unions, Enoch reads. Your very existence violates the order of creation. The earth groans beneath your weight. The sky weeps at your violence. Heaven itself cries out for justice. Anak steps forward, his golden hair catching the sunlight. We did not choose our birth. Why should we suffer for our father's choices? For a moment, Enoch's expression softens. These beings are monsters, but they are also victims, born into corruption through no fault of their own, cursed from their first breath with appetites that can never be satisfied. You speak truly, Enoch admits, but knowledge brings responsibility. You have seen the suffering you cause. You have tasted the blood of innocence. You chose to embrace your dark nature rather than fight against it. Zuzum's eyes flare with supernatural fire. What choice did we have? Humans fear us. Angels reject us. We belong nowhere. We take what we need to survive. You take far more than survival requires, Enoch counters. You feast when you could eat. You destroy when you could build. You rule through terror when you could lead through strength. The giants exchange glances. They know his words carry truth. They remember their early days when some among them tried to live peacefully among humans. They recall the brief time when a few sought to use their gifts for protection rather than conquest. But appetite always won. Hunger always returned. The corruption in their blood proved stronger than any noble intention. It matters not, Goliath says finally. We are what we are. If heaven wishes to judge us, let heaven come and try. Lightning splits the clear sky. Thunder rolls across the landscape like the footsteps of approaching armies. The earth itself seems to shudder at the giant's blasphemy. Enoch raises the scroll high. Divine fire streams from its surface. Heaven comes indeed. Prepare yourselves, children of the Watchers. Your time of reckoning draws near. The giants flee. Their superhuman speed carries them across the landscape like shadows racing before storm clouds. But they cannot outrun the words that burn in their minds. They cannot escape the truth that follows wherever they go. Judgment comes whether they face it with courage or cowardice. The prophecy of doom. The gathering takes place in a valley where shadows never fully retreat. Ancient stones circle a clearing older than human memory. Here the Watchers once held their councils of rebellion. Here they planned their descent into corruption. Now they assemble to hear their fate proclaimed by heaven's chosen messenger. Shimihaza arrives first, his magnificent form diminished by the weight of approaching doom. His copper wings drag behind him like broken banners. The starlight that once crowned his head flickers like dying embers. Other Watchers follow in procession of the damned. Azazel skulks at the circle's edge. his teachings of warfare and vanity having poisoned entire civilizations. Barakel hovers uncertainly, the secrets of lightning and storm no longer bringing him joy. Kokobel studies the stars above, but their ancient patterns now speak only of judgment. Pinemu wrings his hands, his gift of writing turned to blasphemous purposes. 200 fallen angels gather like ravens before a battlefield. Enoch stands in the circle's center. The scroll of judgment glows in his weathered hands. Divine authority radiates from his small frame in waves that make the fallen angels tremble. Heaven's power flows through him like a river of liquid light. Children of rebellion, he begins, his voice carrying across the valley with supernatural clarity. Your Creator speaks through me. Listen to the words of the one you have forsaken. The scroll unfurls completely. Words of fire dance across its surface, spelling out destinies no appeal can alter. The watchers press closer despite their fear. They must hear what awaits them. They must know the price of their choices. You were created to be guardians of creation, Enoch reads. Instead, you became its corruptors. You were meant to reflect heaven's glory. Instead, you taught humanity to war, to seduce, to practice forbidden arts that poison both body and soul. Shemihaza steps forward. His noble features twist with anguish. We sought only to ease human suffering. We saw their weakness and wanted to make them strong. You saw their innocence and chose to steal it. Enoch replies without mercy. You watched their wonder at creation and decided to replace it with cynicism and lust. Your gifts became curses. Your teachings became snares. Azazel bristles with defiance. His form radiates the violence he has spread across the earth. Humans were dying in ignorance. We brought them knowledge. We made them powerful. You brought them knowledge of destruction, Enoch counters. You taught them to forge weapons that turn brother against brother. You showed them vanities that breed envy and pride. You gave them power, but you stole their peace. The scroll burns brighter. Heaven's judgment blazes forth in words that sear the fallen angels' supernatural vision. Their fate unfolds before them like a map leading only to darkness. Hear your sentence, Enoch continues. Shemihaza, leader of rebellion, you will be bound with chains that cannot break. Buried beneath the earth, you will remain until the great day of final judgment. No light will reach you. No comfort will find you. Your cries will echo unheard through eternity's corridors. The leader of the Watchers falls to his knees. His magnificent wings crumple like broken sails. The reality of his doom crashes over him like a collapsing mountain. He who commanded legions of angels will spend eternity in solitary darkness. Azazel, teacher of warfare and vanity, your fate runs deeper still. You will be cast into the desert of Dudael. Rough and jagged rocks will cover you. There you will dwell until the day of judgment, when you will be cast into the fire that burns forever. Azazel's defiance crumbles. His warrior's pride cannot stand against the weight of divine sentence. He staggers backward as if physically struck by invisible hammers. One by one, Enoch pronounces judgment on every fallen watcher. Barakel, who taught astrology, will be imprisoned beneath mountains of ice. Kokobel, who revealed the constellations, will be bound in chains of frozen starlight. Penemu, who taught writing, will have his tongue sealed until his knowledge becomes a source of eternal torment. No mercy softens the pronouncements. No appeal can alter the sentences. Justice demands payment for the corruption they have spread. What of our children? Shemihaza asks, his voice breaking like a storm-lashed tree. What becomes of the giants? Enoch's expression grows even more grave. The scroll reveals visions that make even heaven weep. Your offspring will destroy each other. Their hunger will turn them into cannibals who feast on their own kind. Brother will slay brother until none remain. The earth will drink their blood like rain. The Watchers cry out in anguish. Whatever their crimes, they love their giant children. The thought of those mighty beings tearing each other apart fills them with unbearable grief. Their spirits will not find rest, Enoch continues relentlessly. They will become demons that plague the earth until the final cleansing. Their voices will whisper corruption into human hearts. Their presence will spread madness and despair. Barakel raises trembling hands toward heaven. Is there no mercy? Can nothing be done to spare them? Mercy was offered when they first drew breath, Enoch replies. They chose violence over peace. They chose appetite over restraint. They chose tyranny over service. Their fate flows from their choices. The scroll reveals more visions, cities burning under the giant's rampage, human mothers weeping over devoured children, the earth itself crying out under the weight of unnatural corruption. Every image testifies to the necessity of judgment. You taught your children well, Enoch says sadly, too well. They learned to take without giving. They learned to consume without creating. They learned to rule through fear without understanding love. Shemihaza covers his face with hands that once reflected divine glory. We thought ourselves wise. We believed we could improve on heaven's plan. Pride whispered lies into your hearts, Enoch explains. It convinced you that rebellion was wisdom. It taught you that disobedience was strength. Now you discover that separation from the source of all goodness leads only to destruction. The valley fills with the sound of weeping. 200 fallen angels mourn their fate and the fate of their children. Their tears fall like rain on ground already soaked with the blood of their victims. When will judgment fall? Kokobel asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Enoch looks toward the horizon where storm clouds gather like divine armies. Lightning flickers in their depths. Thunder rolls across the sky like the footsteps of approaching justice. Even now the archangels receive their orders, he says. Michael sharpens his sword. Gabriel prepares his trumpet. Raphael readies his chains. Uriel kindles the fires of purification. Your time grows short. The watchers feel the truth of his words in their supernatural bones. Power drains from them like water from cracked vessels. Their connection to heaven's strength grows thinner with each passing moment. Use these final days wisely, Enoch counsels. Make whatever peace you can with your choices. Seek what mercy might still be found in repentance, though it cannot change your fate. Some of the watchers fall prostrate, begging forgiveness they know will not come. Others rage against the heavens that created them. A few simply stand in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their doom. But judgment comes regardless of their response. The prophecy has been spoken, the sentence has been pronounced. Nothing remains but the execution of heaven's perfect justice. The watchers despair. The gathering breaks like a storm-shattered ship. Fallen angels scatter across the landscape, each seeking some impossible escape from the judgment that pursues them like hunting wolves. No corner of creation offers sanctuary. No power in heaven or earth can alter their fate. Shemihaza wanders the peaks of Mount Hermon like a shade haunting his own tomb. His copper wings drag behind him, leaving furrows in the ancient stone. Once he commanded 200 mighty spirits in perfect harmony. Now he cannot even command his own despair. The weight of leadership crushes down upon him. Every corrupted human soul bears his fingerprints. Every giant's atrocity flows from his decision to rebel. He convinced his brothers to abandon their posts. He spoke the words that bound them all to destruction. I thought I was freeing them, he whispers to the wind. I believed I was giving them choice. But the wind offers no comfort. It carries only the distant cries of his victims and the nearer sounds of his children's violence. The giants continue their rampage even as doom approaches. They cannot help themselves. Corruption runs too deep in their supernatural blood. Azazel huddles in a cave where he once taught humans the arts of war. Weapons litter the floor around him. Bronze swords dulled with blood, spear points that have pierced 10,000 hearts, shields bearing the dents of countless battles. His gifts to humanity, his legacy of destruction. He remembers the first human student, a young man named Cain, who burned with rage against his brother. Azazel showed him how to forge a blade. He demonstrated the killing stroke. He whispered encouragement when the boy hesitated. You have the right, Azazel had said. Take what should be yours. Now that first murder has spawned millions more. War spreads across the earth like wildfire. Nations rise and fall in cycles of violence that never end. His teachings echo through history like curses that renew themselves with each generation. The cave walls reflect distorted images of his former glory. Once his beauty rivaled the morning star. His wisdom encompassed the secrets of metallurgy and warfare. Angels sought his counsel. Humans worshipped him as a god. Now he sees only the monster he has become. His reflection shows eyes that burn with endless hunger, hands stained with the blood of innocence, a heart that forgot how to feel anything except pride and appetite. Barakul drifts through storm clouds above the earth, his mastery of lightning and thunder now a source of bitter irony. Each flash of lightning reminds him of heaven's power. Every roll of thunder speaks of approaching judgment. The very elements he once commanded now serve to announce his doom. He watches human cities below, their lights twinkling like fallen stars. In those cities, astrologers study the heavens using knowledge he provided. They chart the movements of planets and predict the future through patterns he revealed. They think they command supernatural wisdom, but their predictions bring only sorrow. Kings start wars based on celestial signs. Merchants cheat customers when the stars seem favorable. Lovers betray each other following astrological advice. His gift of cosmic knowledge has become another tool of corruption. I showed them the beauty of the heavens, he murmurs to the lightning. I wanted them to understand their place in creation's grand design. Instead, they use his teachings to justify cruelty. They blame the stars for their evil choices. They claim celestial destiny when they choose to harm others. Knowledge without wisdom becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. Kokobel studies the constellations from a mountaintop observatory he built for human astronomers. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, but their light brings him no joy. Each constellation tells the story of his rebellion. Each planet's movement marks another step toward judgment. He remembers when he first revealed the names of the stars to wondering humans. Their faces glowed with delight as he pointed out patterns in the cosmic tapestry. They gasped in amazement when he explained how the celestial bodies influenced earthly events. Look, he had said, you are connected to the very heavens. The same forces that move stars flow through your blood. But connection became corruption. Humans began to worship stars instead of their creator. They offered sacrifices to planetary spirits. They built temples to honor celestial powers that were never meant to receive devotion. The knowledge that should have inspired humility bred arrogance instead. Humans began to think themselves gods when they understood stellar mechanics. They used astronomical knowledge to claim authority over their neighbors. They justified oppression by appealing to cosmic law. Penemu clutches tablets covered with the first written languages he taught to humanity. His gift of writing was meant to preserve wisdom across generations. Instead, it became a tool for spreading lies and hatred at unprecedented speed. He watches scribes in distant cities recording false histories that glorify tyrants. He sees contracts written to cheat the innocent. He observes love letters designed to seduce the pure. His gift of literacy serves corruption as eagerly as it ever served truth. The tablets in his hands bear the first human words ever carved in stone, simple symbols that seemed so innocent when he first demonstrated their use, a way to capture thoughts and share them across vast distances, a method to accumulate knowledge beyond any individual's lifetime. Now, those same symbols spread blasphemy like fire through dry grass. They record spells that summon demons. They preserve techniques for creating poisons. They teach methods of torture and oppression. His beautiful gift has become humanity's most dangerous weapon. Other watchers suffer their own unique agonies. Sariel, who taught the courses of the moon, watches lunar cycles mark the approach of judgment. Raguel, who revealed the paths of the stars, sees cosmic order turned against him. Each angel faces the perversion of his special gifts. They gather in small groups, seeking comfort in shared misery. But even their conversations bring no peace. Every word reminds them of their crimes. Every memory shows another choice that led toward destruction. Perhaps we can flee, Barakel suggests desperately. Hide in the depths of the earth until this passes. There is no hiding from the Most High, Shemihaza replies. His eye sees all. His reach extends everywhere. Then we fight, Azazel growls. We are mighty still. Our children are strong. Let heaven try to take us. Fight with what? Kokobel asks bitterly. Our power flows from the throne we have rejected. We are like branches cut from the tree, growing weaker with each passing hour. The truth of his words settles over them like a burial shroud. They feel their strength ebbing like blood from mortal wounds. Their connection to heaven's power grows thinner each day. Soon they will be helpless before the archangel's assault. Some consider returning to heaven to beg forgiveness, but they know that path leads nowhere. Their rebellion cut too deep, their corruption spread too far. Justice demands payment that mercy cannot waive. Others dream of taking as many humans as possible into destruction with them. If they must fall, why not drag creation down with them? But even revenge offers no real satisfaction. It only adds to the weight of their crimes. A few simply wait in silence. They accept their fate without resistance or rage. They understand that they chose this path with every decision to rebel. Now they must walk it to its bitter end. The days pass like a death march. Each sunrise brings them closer to judgment. Each sunset marks another step toward their binding. Time itself becomes their enemy, carrying them inexorably toward a fate they cannot escape. And still the giants continue their rampage, unaware that their father's doom approaches like an avalanche gathering speed. The corruption they have spread continues to metastasize. The earth itself groans under the weight of unnatural evil. But change comes, whether the fallen welcome it or not. Heaven stirs. Archangels receive their orders. Justice prepares to sweep across the world like cleansing fire. The age of the Watchers draws to its close. Giants turn on each other. The bonds that once united the giants begin to fray like ropes exposed to constant strain. Brotherhood dissolves into suspicion. Alliance crumbles into competition. The supernatural appetites that drove them to prey upon humanity now turn inward like serpents devouring their own tails. It starts with hunger. Always hunger. The giants have consumed so much that little remains. Cities lie in ruins, their populations devoured or scattered. Herds of cattle disappear overnight. Forests fall to feed their endless need for fuel and shelter. The earth itself grows barren under their relentless appetite. Og stands over the last human settlement in his territory, watching smoke rise from emptied buildings. His massive stomach still growls despite having consumed 3 families that morning. The hunger never stops. It gnaws at him constantly, a supernatural curse that no amount of food can satisfy. His brother Anak approaches from the east, leading a pack of lesser giants. Their eyes burn with the same insatiable need. They have traveled far seeking prey, but every land they visit bears the marks of earlier raids. Brother, Anak calls out, his golden hair matted with dried blood. Share your feast. We hunger. Og turns slowly. His hand rests on a war club the size of a cedar tree. I have no feast to share. The humans here barely filled a tooth gap. Then we hunt together, Anak suggests. Surely more settlements exist beyond these hills. But Og knows better. His scouts have ranged far and wide. They report the same story everywhere. Empty cities, scattered refugees, lands picked clean of anything edible. The giants have been too successful. Their prey has vanished. There are no more humans, Og says flatly. We have eaten them all. The lesser giants mutter among themselves. Fear flickers in their supernatural eyes. If no humans remain, what will they eat? Their appetites demand constant feeding. Starvation will drive them mad. Anak's gaze falls on a smaller giant named Zuzim, who brought up the rear of their group. The young giant looks well-fed despite the general scarcity. His flesh seems firmer than the others. His blood would taste sweeter. Perhaps, Anak says slowly, we need to expand our definition of prey. The words hang in the air like poison gas. Every giant understands their meaning. They have crossed one final boundary. Cannibalism calls to them with the same irresistible pull that once led them to human flesh. Zuzim backs away, but the other giants surround him. Their eyes glow with supernatural hunger. Their mouths water at the thought of fresh meat. They have forgotten that he is their brother. He is only food now. The young giant fights, but his strength cannot match their combined might. His screams echo across the empty landscape as they tear him apart. His blood paints the ground in crimson pools. His flesh satisfies their hunger for perhaps an hour. Then the need returns, stronger than ever. Word spreads among the scattered giant clans. Brother has eaten brother. The last taboo has fallen. If survival demands it, any giant might become prey to another. Trust dies faster than their victims once did. Goliath leads the mightiest clan, his reputation built on countless battles against human armies. But strength provides no immunity to hunger. His own followers eye him speculatively when they think he cannot see. Even loyal subordinates dream of tasting their leader's flesh. He knows their thoughts. He shares their desperate need. Leadership means nothing when starvation drives rational thought away. Soon he will be forced to choose between killing his followers or being killed by them. The choice comes at midnight. Ashdod, his most trusted lieutenant, approaches with a spear crafted from human bones. "My lord," he says, "the hunger grows unbearable. We must feed." On what? Goliath asks, though he already knows the answer. On whatever meat presents itself. Their eyes meet in the darkness. Both warriors have faced death in battle without flinching. But this confrontation carries different stakes. This fight will end with one of them being devoured by the other. They circle each other like wolves in the wilderness. Goliath's size advantage means little when hunger makes Ashdod desperate. The lieutenant moves with the fluid grace of one who has nothing left to lose. Ashdod strikes first, his bone spear seeking Goliath's heart. The leader deflects the thrust but feels the point slice across his ribs. Supernatural blood flows like molten bronze. The scent drives both giants into a feeding frenzy. They crash together with the sound of colliding mountains. Trees shatter around them as they grapple for advantage. The earth cracks under their combined weight. Lesser giants gather to watch, their eyes fixed on the winner, who will provide their next meal. Goliath's strength finally tells. He breaks Ashdod's neck with a sound like snapping timber. But the victory brings no joy. He knows this is only the beginning. His remaining followers still hunger. Soon they will turn on each other and eventually on him. Across the world, similar scenes play out wherever giants gather. The strongest prey upon the weakest until only apex predators remain. Then those titans face each other in battles that shake the very foundations of the earth. Anak corners his cousin Emim beside a dried riverbed. Both giants tower above the landscape like moving mountains. Their fight lasts 3 days and nights, rearranging the local geography with every blow. When it ends, Anak feasts alone among the ruins of what was once a fertile valley. The Zamzumim clan tears itself apart in a single bloody night. Brothers who once fought side by side now seek each other's throats. The ground beneath their settlement turns into a lake of supernatural blood. By dawn, only 2 survive, and they eye each other with naked hunger. Even the mightiest giants fall to treachery. Shishai, who once commanded respect from every member of his race, dies when his own children ambush him during sleep. They feast on his flesh while his blood still steams in the cool night air. The cannibalistic frenzy spreads like plague. Giants who avoided the initial madness find themselves drawn into the violence. Hunger makes philosophers of them all, and their philosophy has only one principle: consume or be consumed. Some try to resist the urge. They remember their origins, their supernatural heritage, their bonds of kinship, but starvation strips away everything except need. The corruption in their blood wins over every noble impulse. Even the most reluctant eventually join the feast. Others embrace the cannibalism with savage joy. They discover that giant flesh provides more satisfaction than human meat ever did. The supernatural blood of their own kind nourishes them in ways that mortal prey never could. They become addicted to the taste of their brother's death. The earth bears witness to battles that dwarf any human conflict. When giants fight each other, mountains crumble. Rivers change course. Valleys disappear under the weight of fallen titans. The landscape itself becomes a casualty of their civil war. Og finally corners his brother Anak beside the ruins of an ancient city. Both giants have grown lean despite their cannibalistic diet. Their supernatural flesh regenerates too slowly to keep pace with their appetites. They are slowly starving despite their constant feeding. Brother, Og says, his voice carrying across the wasteland, it ends here. Anak nods grimly. His golden hair has turned silver with stress and hunger. Blood stains mark where he has fed on lesser giants. One of us feeds. One of us dies. Such is our fate. They charge each other with the fury of dying gods. Their collision sends shockwaves through the earth's crust. Distant seas feel the tremors of their battle. The sky itself seems to darken as 2 of the mightiest giants fight for the right to continue their cursed existence. The battle rages for 7 days and nights. Neither brother can gain decisive advantage. Their strength proves too evenly matched. Their supernatural endurance keeps them fighting long past the point where mortal beings would collapse. On the 8th day, they die together. Their final blows land simultaneously. Both giants fall, their life's blood mixing in pools that will poison the ground for generations. The last of the great giant clans perishes in fraternal murder. Across the world, similar endings play out wherever giants once ruled. The race that terrorized humanity destroys itself through its own appetite. Brother devours brother until none remains strong enough to continue the slaughter. The earth grows quiet for the first time in centuries. No giant footsteps shake the ground. No supernatural roars echo across the valleys. No titan shadows fall across human settlements. But the silence brings no peace. The corruption the giants spread continues to fester. Their spilled blood seeps into the earth's very foundations. Their dying screams echo in places where the veil between worlds grows thin, and still their spirits linger, hungry as ever, waiting for new flesh to consume in whatever form they might find. The archangels, heaven's silence breaks like the calm before creation's first dawn. The throne room blazes with light that outshines 1,000 suns. Four figures stand before the Almighty, their forms radiating power that makes stars tremble in their courses. The archangels have received their orders. Justice begins its descent. Michael steps forward first. His sword gleams with fire that burns without consuming. His armor reflects the glory of the throne itself. Wings of pure light spread behind him like banners of war. When he speaks, his voice carries the authority of divine judgment. Lord of hosts, your will be done. Gabriel follows, his trumpet gleaming like captured starlight. His form shifts between warrior and herald, messenger and executioner. The words of God flow through him like music that can reshape reality itself. His presence brings both terror and hope. Raphael stands ready, healing chains coiled around his arm like serpents of mercy. His power binds as surely as it heals. He will restore order to creation by removing the sources of corruption. His work brings pain that leads to wholeness. Uriel completes the quartet, fire dancing around his form like living robes. His flames purify everything they touch. What cannot be cleansed, they consume utterly. He brings the final solution to problems too deep for any other remedy. The Most High speaks, and his words thunder through every realm of existence. The Watchers have corrupted my creation. Their children devour the earth. The cry of innocent blood reaches my throne. Let justice fall like rain upon the wicked. The archangels bow as one. Light streams from their forms as they prepare for descent. Each one carries power sufficient to reshape continents. Together, they represent heaven's full might, turned toward the cleansing of creation. Michael leads the assault. His flight from heaven's throne to earth's surface takes less time than a heartbeat. He appears first above Mount Hermon, where the Watchers made their original pact. The very air ignites around his blazing form. Shemihaza feels the archangel's presence like a sword thrust through his supernatural consciousness. The leader of the fallen Watchers emerges from his hiding place among the ancient stones. His copper wings spread in defiance, but their light seems dim beside Michael's blazing glory. Michael, Shemihaza says, his voice carrying forced calm, you come to destroy us. I come to execute judgment, Michael replies. His sword materializes in his hand, its blade singing with righteous fury. Your rebellion ends today. They had been friends once before the fall. Michael remembered when Shemihaza's voice joined the heavenly chorus in perfect harmony. He recalled their shared service before the throne, like their mutual dedication to creation's welfare. But friendship cannot stay justice. Love cannot compromise with corruption. Some wounds cut too deep for healing. Shemihaza attacks without warning, his supernatural strength channeled into one desperate assault. His blow could shatter mountains, but Michael's blade intercepts it effortlessly. Divine fire meets rebellious power in a clash that sends shockwaves racing across the earth. The battle lasts mere moments. Shemihaza's strength, already weakened by separation from heaven's power, cannot match an archangel's fury. Michael's sword finds its mark. The leader of the Watchers falls, his form bound by chains of light that burn without destroying. Your imprisonment begins, Michael declares. Beneath the earth you will remain until the final judgment. The ground opens like a mouth eager to swallow corruption. Shemihaza disappears into depths where no light penetrates. His cries echo briefly before distance swallows them. The leader of rebellion vanishes into solitary darkness. Gabriel's trumpet sounds across the sky, its notes carrying divine commands to every corner of creation. The Watchers hear their individual summons in the celestial music. Each fallen angel knows his time has come. Barakel tries to flee among the storm clouds, but Gabriel's music follows him like hunting hounds. Lightning answers the archangel's call, forming chains that bind the teacher of astrology. He plummets from the sky like a fallen star, his mastery of the elements turned against him. Kokobel attempts to hide among the constellations he once revealed to humanity, but the stars themselves reject his presence. Stellar winds drive him back toward Earth, where Gabriel waits with bonds of frozen starlight. The astronomer angel finds himself chained by the very cosmos he thought he commanded. Penemu burns his writings in a futile attempt to destroy the evidence of his crimes, but the damage spreads too far for any fire to erase. Gabriel's trumpet blast scatters his hiding place like leaves before a hurricane. The inventor of writing discovers that some words cannot be taken back. One by one, the Watchers fall to Gabriel's pursuit. Their supernatural speed means nothing against an archangel's determination. Their hiding places offer no sanctuary from heaven's justice. Each fallen angel finds himself bound and cast into imprisonment tailored to his specific crimes. Raphael descends with chains that heal by binding. His work seems gentler than his brother's, but proves no less thorough. He seeks out the Watchers who corrupted creation through false healing and twisted mercy. Sariel, who taught the courses of the moon and led humans into lunar worship, finds himself wrapped in bonds that shine like captured moonbeams. His connection to celestial cycles becomes his prison. Every phase of the moon tightens his chains. Raguel, who revealed the paths of the stars to astrologers and fortune-tellers, discovers stellar pathways leading only to his own binding. The cosmic roads he opened become channels for divine justice. His knowledge of celestial mechanics serves only to ensure his perfect imprisonment. Each binding follows the same pattern. The Watchers' gifts become their chains. Their areas of expertise transform into sources of torment. They taught corruption, so corruption becomes their prison. Uriel brings the final cleansing. His fire seeks out the remaining giants who survived their cannibalistic civil war. These last titans face divine judgment without their father's protection. They stand alone against heaven's fury. The surviving giants attempt to band together for one final battle. Og leads perhaps a dozen of his kind in a desperate charging angel. Their combined strength once reshaped landscapes. Their united roar once sent armies fleeing in terror. But they face divine fire now. Uriel's flames wash over them like a tide of purification. Their supernatural flesh, corrupted since birth, cannot withstand the touch of absolute purity. They burn away like dross in a refiner's furnace. Some giants try to repent in their final moments. They cry out for mercy they never showed to their victims. They beg forgiveness for appetites they never tried to control. But their words come too late. Justice delayed is not justice denied. The fire spreads beyond the giants themselves. It consumes the weapons they forged, the cities they built, the monuments they raised to their own glory. Every trace of their civilization disappears in divine flames. Even their footprints fade from the hardest stone. Only their spirits remain, and these prove harder to cleanse. The giants' supernatural nature ensures their consciousness survives bodily death. They become demons wandering the earth, their hunger transformed into spiritual corruption. They will plague humanity until the final judgment, but their physical reign of terror ends forever. The archangels complete their work as the sun sets over a transformed world. Every watcher lies bound according to his crimes. Every giant burns in purifying fire. The immediate sources of corruption have been removed from creation, but scars remain. The earth itself bears wounds that will take millennia to heal. Human civilization lies in ruins. Knowledge and innocence, once lost, cannot be easily restored. The cleansing solves the immediate crisis but cannot undo all the damage. Still, heaven's justice has been served. The rebellion that threatened to destroy creation has been crushed. Order begins to reassert itself across the wounded world. The age of the Watchers ends. The time of the giants passes into legend. Creation prepares for a fresh start under divine protection. Yet one more act of cleansing awaits. The corruption runs too deep for anything less than complete renewal. The earth itself must be washed clean. The time of the flood approaches like dawn after the longest night. Binding of Azazel. The desert of Dudael stretches endlessly under a sky that never seems to offer rain. Rocky outcroppings thrust through sand like broken bones. The wind carries no relief, only the whispered promises of mirages that vanish when approached. In this wasteland where even scorpions struggle to survive, heaven prepares the most terrible of prisons. Raphael descends with chains that gleam like captured lightning. His healing power, reversed and focused, will bind rather than restore. His face shows no joy in this work, but neither does it reflect any hesitation. Justice demands what justice demands. Azazel senses the archangel's approach from leagues away. The teacher of warfare feels battle hunger rise in his corrupted blood. His hands close around weapons of his own forging, blades sharp enough to cut through mountains, spears that never miss their targets, shields that have turned aside the weapons of gods. But his arsenal brings him no comfort. He faces Raphael the healer, whose power flows directly from the throne of the Most High. No weapon forged by fallen hands can pierce armor woven from divine authority. Still, Azazel will not submit quietly. He has taught humans the arts of war for millennia. He has shown them how to kill efficiently, how to torture creatively, how to wage battles that leave entire civilizations in ruins. If he must fall, he will demonstrate the lessons he has spread across the earth. The fallen angel takes flight on wings that once bore him through heaven's courts. His form radiates the violence he has spread like plague among humanity. Every movement speaks of controlled brutality. Every gesture promises swift and merciless death. Raphael waits with infinite patience. He understands Azazel's need to fight. The warrior's pride demands one final battle, even against impossible odds. The healer will grant this last dignity before eternal imprisonment begins. Teacher of violence, Raphael says, his voice carrying both sorrow and resolve. Your lessons have borne bitter fruit. Cities burn with fires you taught humans to kindle. Armies march with weapons you showed them how to forge. Blood flows in rivers because you opened the first vein. Azazel laughs, but the sound carries no joy. I made them strong. I gave them the power to defend themselves and tried out. If they chose to use my gifts for conquest rather than protection, that choice was theirs alone. You taught them that strength comes from killing, Raphael replies. You showed them that victory requires the destruction of enemies. You convinced them that peace was weakness and war was wisdom. I taught them truth. Azazel snarls. The universe rewards the strong and devours the weak. Better they learn this lesson from me than discover it when enemies overrun their lands. You taught them your truth, Raphael corrects. A truth born from rebellion and nurtured by pride. But your perspective was always distorted. You saw only conflict because conflict was all you chose to see. Azazel draws his greatest weapon, a sword forged from the first metal humans ever smelted under his guidance. Its blade drinks light rather than reflecting it. Its edge has tasted the blood of angels and mortals alike. It carries the concentrated malice of 10,000 battlefields. Enough words, he growls. If heaven wishes to bind me, let heaven prove its strength. He attacks with the fury of a falling star. His blade seeks Raphael's heart with precision born from eons of warfare. His movements flow like water turned deadly. He fights with the accumulated skill of every battle he has ever witnessed or inspired. Raphael meets the assault with chains that sing as they move through the air. Each link contains power sufficient to bind a mountain. Together, they form restraints that even an archangel would struggle to break. They wrap around Azazel's sword, turning his greatest weapon into an anchor that drags him toward defeat. The battle rages across the desert waste. Where Azazel's feet touch the ground, the sand fuses into glass. Where his weapons strike stone, new canyons split the earth. His fury reshapes the landscape like a force of nature unleashed. But Raphael's power flows steadier and deeper. His chains multiply with each exchange, wrapping around Azazel's limbs like serpents that cannot be shaken loose. The teacher of warfare finds himself caught in bonds that tighten with every struggle. You cannot hold me, Azazel pants, his strength beginning to ebb. I am war itself. I am the hunger for victory that burns in every heart. Bind my body, but my teachings will endure forever. Your teachings will be remembered, Raphael agrees sadly. But they will also be overcome. Humans will learn other ways. They will discover that strength can protect rather than destroy. They will find wisdom in mercy and power in forgiveness. Azazel's laughter turns bitter. You know nothing of human nature? I have seen their hearts. I have felt their deepest hungers. They crave dominance above all else. They worship power because power is all they truly understand. Some do, Raphael admits. Your corruption spread farther than any single teaching should, but others resist. Some humans choose love over conquest. Some prefer building to destroying. Your way is not the only way. The chains complete their work. Azazel finds himself bound from head to foot in links that burn without consuming. His wings are pinned against his back. His weapons lie scattered and broken around him. The teacher of warfare stands defeated by the healer's touch. Raphael raises his hands, and the desert floor splits open. The crack reveals depths beyond human understanding. Jagged rocks thrust upward like the teeth of some primordial beast. The opening yawns wider, preparing to swallow its intended prisoner. Into the pit you go, Raphael declares. Rough and jagged stones will cover you. Darkness will be your companion. Silence will be your teacher. There you will remain until the day of final judgment. Azazel struggles against his bonds one final time. His supernatural strength strains against chains that tighten in response to his efforts. This is not justice, he gasps. This is revenge disguised as righteousness. This is consequence, Raphael replies gently. Every choice creates results. You chose to spread violence, so violence claims you. You taught others to destroy, so destruction becomes your portion. Justice is not revenge. It is the universe maintaining its balance. The fallen angel plummets into the abyss. His form disappears into depths where light fears to venture. The jagged stones close over him like water, sealing him away from creation's surface. His cries echo briefly before distance swallows them completely. Raphael gestures, and the desert floor heals itself. Sand flows back over the scar where Azazel vanished. Within moments, no trace remains of the opening that swallowed the teacher of warfare. The wasteland looks exactly as it did before, empty and windswept under the merciless sun. But beneath the surface, something writhes in eternal captivity. Azazel discovers that his prison possesses its own cruel perfection. The rough stones press against him from every direction, sharp enough to cause constant pain, but not sharp enough to grant the mercy of death. The darkness around him pulses with a life of its own, whispering reminders of every lesson he ever taught. He sees visions of his students applying his teachings. Cain raising the first weapon against his brother, soldiers marching toward their first organized battle, smiths forging increasingly deadly tools of war. His legacy spreads across human history like blood poisoning in a wound. But he also sees things that surprise him. Students who reject his lessons, warriors who choose mercy over vengeance, soldiers who refuse orders to slaughter civilians. His teachings encounter resistance in some human hearts. Not every soul accepts violence as the highest wisdom. The realization brings him no comfort. If anything, it deepens his torment. He could have taught different lessons. He could have shown humans how to forge tools of creation rather than destruction. He chose his path freely, just as his victims chose theirs. The weight of those choices settles over him like the stones that seal his prison. Every decision echoes through eternity. Every teaching ripples across generations. He cannot escape the consequences of his rebellion any more than he can escape the bonds that hold him. Above, the desert wind continues its endless song. Sand shifts and dunes migrate according to patterns older than civilization. The sun rises and sets in eternal cycles that mark time's passage. Life continues on creation's surface while corruption festers in hidden depths. Azazel's binding is complete. The teacher of warfare will spread no more lessons. The forger of weapons will craft no more tools of destruction. The corrupter of innocence will seduce no more pure hearts. One source of evil has been removed from the world. Many others remain, but heaven's justice proceeds methodically. Each corrupted angel will face appropriate judgment. Each source of rebellion will be isolated and contained. The cleansing of creation continues, see, one binding at a time. The chains of Shemahaza deep beneath Mount Hermon, where the roots of the mountains sink into the earth's hidden foundations. A prison waits that was prepared before the world's creation. Stone corridors wind through darkness that has never known light. Chambers carved from living rock echo with silence deeper than death itself. Here, in depths that no mortal being could survive, heaven prepares to entomb the architect of rebellion. Michael descends through passages that open at his approach and seal behind his passing. His blazing form provides the only illumination these tunnels have ever received. The light reveals walls covered with symbols that predate human language. Warnings carved in the first days of creation, promises of judgment written in stone that will outlast the stars. Behind him, wrapped in chains that burn with righteous fire, Shemihaza follows in bonds that permit no escape. The leader of the fallen watchers moves like a sleepwalker through his own nightmare. His copper wings drag against the tunnel walls, leaving scratches that will remain until the final judgment. "Did you know?" Shemihaza asks, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow space. "When you watched us take the oath on Hermon's Peak, did you know where it would lead?" Michael's pace never falters. We all knew. Free will includes the freedom to choose destruction. You picked your path with full knowledge of where it led. But the humans, Shemihaza presses, did they deserve what followed? They were innocent when we first approached them. Their corruption is our responsibility. Their corruption was their choice, Michael replies firmly. You offered temptation, but they chose to accept it. You provided the means for evil, but they chose to embrace it. Free will works both ways. The tunnel opens into a vast chamber hollowed from the mountain's heart. Chains hang from the ceiling like metal rain frozen in place. Each link gleams with power sufficient to bind a god. Together, they form restraints that could hold the forces of creation itself. In the chamber's center stands a pillar of black stone that seems to drink light rather than reflect it. Iron rings pierce its surface at intervals, waiting for the prisoner they were designed to hold. The pillar rises from floor to ceiling, a monument to the consequences of rebellion. Shemihaza stares at his final destination. The reality of eternal imprisonment crashes over him like a collapsing building. He will spend the rest of time bound to that pillar, alone in darkness, with only his memories for company. "How long?" he whispers. "Until the great day of judgment," Michael answers. "Until creation itself stands before the throne for final accounting, until every choice receives its perfect consequence." And then, Michael's expression grows even more grave. Then comes the lake of fire that burns forever. Then comes the second death that has no ending. Your imprisonment here is mercy compared to what follows. Shemihaza closes his eyes. He remembers the first moment of his rebellion, when pride whispered that he deserved better than simple obedience. He recalls the intoxicating rush of choosing his own path rather than following heaven's commands. The memory tastes like ashes now. "I thought I was freeing myself," he admits. "I believed that independence was better than service." "You were free," Michael says sadly. "You always were. Freedom includes the right to serve willingly. Slavery is compelled obedience. Service is chosen love. You had both options, and you chose neither." The archangel gestures, and the chains begin to move. They descend from the ceiling like living things, wrapping around Shemihaza's form with deliberate precision. Each link settles into place with the finality of fate itself. The fallen angel does not resist. What purpose would struggle serve? His strength, already weakened by separation from heaven's power, could never break bonds forged by divine authority. Better to accept his fate with whatever dignity remains. The chains guide him to the black pillar. Iron rings click open to receive the links that will hold him throughout eternity. His arms stretch out to either side in a mockery of crucifixion. His legs lock into position against the stone. His wings fold against his back, pinned by bonds that allow no movement. "Will anyone remember?" Shemihaza asks as the final chains snap into place. "Will anyone recall what we tried to accomplish?" "They will remember the destruction you caused," Michael replies. "They will remember the giants who devoured cities. They will remember the knowledge that corrupted innocence. Your legacy will serve as a warning for generations yet unborn." Nothing good? Nothing worthy of preservation? Michael considers the question with the seriousness it deserves. You loved your children. That love was real, even if it was selfish. You wanted to help humanity, even if your methods brought only harm. Those impulses came from your original nature, before pride twisted them into rebellion. The admission brings Shemihaza no comfort. Good intentions, corrupted by pride, had produced only evil results. Love, filtered through rebellion, had become possessiveness. Desire to help, poisoned by arrogance, had led to destruction. "I remember heaven," Shemihaza says quietly. "I remember standing before the throne in perfect harmony. I remember when my voice joined the celestial chorus without discord. Can that angel be redeemed?" "That angel died when you chose rebellion," Michael answers with infinite gentleness. What remains is the consequence of your choices. Redemption was offered when you first felt temptation's pull. It was available when you stood with your brothers on Hermon's Peak. It existed until the moment you took human wives and began teaching forbidden knowledge. And now comes justice. Pure, perfect, inescapable justice. The chains complete their work. Shemihaza hangs against the black pillar like a crucified god, bound by metals that will not corrode and stones that will not crumble. His punishment fits his crime with mathematical precision. He who led others into bondage now experiences ultimate captivity. Michael prepares to leave. His work here is finished. Other fallen angels await their individual judgments. Justice proceeds methodically, but it never rests until completion. Will you visit? Shemihaza asks desperately. The thought of absolute solitude terrifies him more than physical torture. Will anyone come to speak with me? No, Michael says simply. Isolation is part of your sentence. You chose to separate yourself from heaven's community. Now you will experience separation complete and eternal. The archangel ascends toward the surface, his light fading gradually. Darkness closes around Shemihaza like water filling a drowning man's lungs. The silence that follows is deeper than any sound he has ever known. Alone in the depths, the former leader of the Watchers begins to understand the true nature of his punishment. Physical bonds hold his body, but mental chains prove far more terrible. Memory becomes his torturer, replaying every choice that led to this moment. He remembers the first human woman who caught his eye. Her beauty seemed to justify any risk. Her desire for knowledge appeared to validate his decision to teach forbidden arts. Their children represented hope for a new kind of being, superior to both angel and human. But beauty had masked corruption. Knowledge had bred arrogance. His children had become monsters who devoured the world that gave them birth. Every memory cuts deeper than the chains that hold him. Every recollection brings fresh understanding of opportunities missed and wisdom ignored. The weight of absolute responsibility settles on his consciousness like lead. Time passes, though time has no meaning in this place. The mountain above shifts with geological cycles. Ice ages come and go, human civilizations rise and fall. But in the depths, nothing changes except the accumulating weight of regret. Shemihaza discovers that isolation provides perfect clarity. Without distraction, he sees his rebellion with absolute honesty. Without excuse, he faces the truth of his choices. Without companionship, he confronts the full reality of what he has become. The chains that bind his body prove merciful compared to the chains that bind his mind. Physical restraint he could eventually accept, but mental torment renews itself with every heartbeat. Memory refuses to fade. Understanding only deepens with time. He hangs against the black pillar, waiting for the judgment that will end his imprisonment, only to begin something far worse. The lake of fire beckons like a second death that never dies. Eternal punishment awaits beyond temporal captivity. But first comes the long, slow education of perfect justice. First comes the endless lesson in consequence and choice. First comes the complete understanding of why love and rebellion cannot coexist. In the darkness beneath Mount Hermon, the architect of humanity's corruption begins his eternal schooling in the cost of pride. Collapse of the giant's reign. The first crack in the giant's dominion appeared on a morning when the sun rose pale and distant. Ohia, mightiest of the Nephilim, stood atop his tower of human bones and felt something he had never experienced before. Weakness crept through his massive frame like frost spreading across still water. His supernatural strength, which had once allowed him to crush mountains with his bare hands, now flickered like a dying flame. When he reached for a boulder to hurl at a fleeing band of humans, his fingers barely moved the stone. The power that had defined his existence was draining away, drop by precious drop. The other giants felt it too. Hahia's roar of fury shook the earth. But the sound carried less force than it had just days before. Mahez discovered that his speed had slowed, his movements becoming clumsy where they had once been fluid as water. The supernatural gifts that had made them gods among mortals were fading like memories of forgotten dreams. At first, they blamed each other for their condition. Ancient rivalries that had simmered beneath their cooperation now erupted into open warfare. Brother turned against brother in battles that scarred the landscape for miles around. Their weakened blows still carried enough force to shatter cities, but each clash left them more drained than before. The Watchers, bound in chains of divine making, could offer no guidance to their troubled offspring. Shimihaza writhed in his supernatural bonds, watching helplessly as his carefully constructed kingdom crumbled. Azazel's rage burned cold in his prison, but his fury could not reach beyond the barriers that held him. Humans who had cowered before the giants for generations began to notice the change. A merchant brave enough to approach a giant feeding ground found the massive forms moving more slowly, their terrible appetites seeming less urgent. Word spread through the survivor networks with the speed of wildfire. The Titans were growing weak. Small acts of defiance began to appear across the giant-controlled territories. A shepherd refused to surrender his flock when a giant demanded it. A village elder stood firm when ordered to provide human sacrifices. These brave souls discovered that the giants' responses lacked their former devastating swiftness. The weakening accelerated as divine judgment continued its relentless work. Powers that had seemed permanent as mountains revealed themselves to be temporary gifts that could be withdrawn. The giants found themselves trapped in bodies that grew heavier with each passing day, their immortal essence slowly bleeding away. Hunger drove them to desperate measures. Giants who had once feasted on human flesh by choice now consumed anything they could find merely to survive. They devoured entire forests, stripped hillsides bare of vegetation, and drained lakes in futile attempts to satisfy appetites that no earthly substance could fill. Their desperation led to increasingly erratic behavior. Some giants turned to cannibalism, attacking their own kind with the same savagery they had once reserved for humans. Others simply collapsed where they stood, their massive forms becoming landmarks that would endure long after their spirits had departed. The infrastructure of giant civilization began to crumble as its builders lost the strength to maintain their impossible constructions. Towers built from human bones toppled in earthquakes that their creators could no longer control. Bridges spanning vast canyons collapsed as the supernatural forces holding them together dissipated. Human survivors emerged from hiding places they had occupied for generations. They crept through ruins that had once been giant strongholds, salvaging what they could from the wreckage of a reign that had seemed eternal. The taste of freedom felt strange on tongues that had known only fear. But freedom came with its own challenges. The world the giants left behind bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before their rise. Landscapes had been reshaped by their conflicts. Rivers had been diverted to serve their needs. Entire regions lay barren from their feeding frenzies. The surviving humans faced the task of rebuilding civilization from fragments scattered across a transformed world. Many had forgotten skills that had once been common knowledge. The arts of agriculture, construction, and governance required rediscovery by people who had focused purely on survival for generations. Some human communities had maintained their knowledge and skills in secret enclaves. These became centers of renewal, sharing their preserved wisdom with refugees who arrived with nothing but hope. Teachers emerged who could remind people how to plant crops, build homes, and form governments based on law rather than force. The process of rebuilding revealed how thoroughly the giants' influence had penetrated human society. Tools and weapons created using the Watchers' forbidden knowledge continued to function, but their users often discovered that the supernatural benefits came with hidden costs. Swords that never dulled might drink their wielder's life force. Armor that turned aside any blow could trap its wearers in prisons of their own making. Many communities chose to abandon these enhanced technologies entirely, returning to simpler methods that aligned with natural law. They melted down supernatural weapons to forge ordinary tools. They dismantled buildings constructed with giant techniques, preferring structures that human hands could understand and maintain. Trade routes that had connected distant regions began to reopen as travelers found they could journey without fear of being harvested by roaming giants. Merchants ventured forth with goods that communities had learned to create using traditional methods. Markets sprang up in places where giants had once held their feeding grounds. Languages evolved rapidly during this period of renewal. Many words associated with the giant era were deliberately forgotten, while new terms arose to describe the work of rebuilding. Poetry and song returned to human culture, but the melodies carried undertones of sorrow for all that had been lost. Religious practices experienced revival as communities sought to understand what had saved them from complete destruction. Temples were rebuilt using stones salvaged from giant ruins. Altars were rededicated to the worship of the Most High, whose intervention had broken the power of the Titans. But the work of rebuilding went slowly. Generations of human knowledge had been lost during the giant years. Techniques that had once been common practice now required painstaking rediscovery. Simple tasks like organizing large construction projects or maintaining extensive irrigation systems challenged communities that had forgotten how such things were accomplished. The giants themselves became something between memory and legend, even as their massive corpses still dotted the landscape. Children born after the collapse heard stories of the Titans that seemed too fantastic to believe. The human mind struggled to accept that such beings had ever walked the earth. Some survivors gathered the bones of fallen giants, using them as foundations for monuments that would remind future generations of the price of corruption. Others simply avoided the places where giants had fallen, allowing nature to slowly reclaim the sites of former horror. New forms of art emerged that helped people process their experiences. Painters created works that captured both the terror of the giant years and the hope of renewal. Sculptors shaped figures that embodied the resilience of human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. The collapse of the giants' reign marked more than just the end of their physical dominion. It represented the failure of power based purely on strength and appetite. The Titans had possessed every advantage except the one that ultimately mattered: alignment with the divine will that governed all creation. As human communities grew stronger and more organized, they began to establish new forms of government based on justice rather than might. Leaders emerged who served their people instead of demanding service from them. Laws were written that protected the weak rather than empowering the strong. Yet even as humanity celebrated its liberation from giant tyranny, thoughtful observers noticed troubling signs. The corruption that had enabled the Titans' rise had not been completely eliminated. Seeds of the old evil remained scattered throughout the world, waiting for conditions that might allow them to sprout once again. The collapse of the giants' reign was complete, but the world left behind remained wounded in ways that would take generations to heal. The work of rebuilding would continue for many years, and the memory of what had been lost would linger even longer. Noah's calling. In the quiet valley where morning dew still fell pure upon uncontaminated grass, Noah worked his fields with the patient rhythm of seasons uncounted. His hands, weathered by honest labor, guided the plow along furrows that his father and grandfather had cut before him. The earth here responded to his touch as it had since creation's dawn, yielding grain that tasted of sunshine and rain unmarked by corruption. The vineyard he tended produced fruit that carried the essence of joy itself. When neighbors gathered to share the wine he crafted, their hearts grew light and their voices rose in songs that remembered better days. Noah's gentle guidance had preserved this pocket of creation's original intent, a sanctuary where life still followed the patterns set by divine wisdom. His family worked alongside him in the golden afternoon light. His wife Naamah moved between the vegetable rows with grace that made even simple tasks appear to be forms of worship. Their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, had grown into men who carried their father's righteousness like inherited treasure. Shem showed particular skill with the animals that grazed in their protected meadows. Creatures that fled from human presence elsewhere would approach him without fear, sensing the peace that surrounded Noah's household. Ham possessed hands that could coax life from the most stubborn seeds, while Japheth crafted tools and furnishings with artistry that rivaled the work of master craftsmen. The family maintained traditions that connected them to the faith of their ancestors. Each morning began with prayers offered to the Most Evening, closed with thanksgiving for blessings received. Their lives moved in harmony with rhythms that had governed righteous households since the world's youth. But Noah carried burdens that his peaceful exterior could not entirely conceal. His prophetic sight showed him visions that disturbed his sleep and shadowed his days. He saw darkness spreading across the earth like ink through water, corruption advancing despite the giant's fall. The cleansing of creation remained incomplete. On the evening when everything changed, Noah walked alone among his vines as stars emerged in a sky that seemed closer than usual. The air itself felt charged with expectancy, as if all creation held its breath. Even the insects fell silent, their constant chirping replaced by a quiet that pressed against his ears. The voice came not as thunder or earthquake, but as a gentle whisper that filled the entire valley. Yet Noah recognized it instantly, for it carried the same tone that had spoken light into darkness at creation's dawn. This was the voice of the Most High speaking directly to mortal ears as he had not done for generations. Noah, the voice called, and his name sounded like music composed before time began. Noah, servant of righteousness, keeper of the ancient ways. Noah fell to his knees among the grapevines, their leaves rustling around him like whispered prayers. "I am here, Lord," he replied, his voice trembling with awe and reverence. "Your servant listens." "The earth grows corrupt beyond healing," the divine voice continued, each word carrying weight that pressed upon Noah's spirit. "Violence fills the hearts of men. The thoughts of their hearts are evil continually. Every imagination of their thoughts is only evil all the time." Noah's prophetic sight suddenly expanded, showing him visions of the world beyond his protected valley. He saw cities whence practiced the forbidden arts learned from the Watchers. He witnessed rituals that opened doorways to realms that should have remained sealed. He observed the casual cruelty that had become humanity's normal way of existing. "The giants are fallen," the voice acknowledged, "but their corruption remains. It spreads through human hearts like poison through veins. Soon it will reach even the places that now seem pure." The truth of these words settled upon Noah like a physical weight. His own valley, his carefully maintained sanctuary, would not remain untouched forever. The growing darkness would eventually reach even here, transforming this last bastion of righteousness into something unrecognizable. "What would you have me do, Lord?" Noah asked, though part of him already sensed the magnitude of what was coming. "I will destroy all flesh," came the reply, the words carrying both infinite sorrow and absolute determination. "I will wash the earth clean with waters that will cover even the highest mountains. Nothing that breathes air will survive except what I preserve through your obedience." Noah's mind reeled at the scope of what was being revealed. This would not be a local judgment affecting one region or nation, but a cleansing that would encompass the entire world. Every human settlement, every corrupt practice, every trace of the Watcher's influence would be swept away in a flood of divine justice. "But you have found grace in my eyes," the voice continued, and warmth filled the words like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You and your household will be saved. Through you, the world will begin again." The responsibility of this calling overwhelmed Noah's mind. He would carry the future of all creation in his hands, serving as the bridge between the corrupted age that was ending and the renewed world that would follow. The weight of such a task seemed beyond human capacity to bear. "I will tell you how to build a vessel," the divine voice explained. "It will be large enough to carry your family and representatives of every kind of living thing. Make it from gopher wood, cover it within and without with pitch. Divide it into rooms and stories according to the pattern I will show you." As the instructions flowed through Noah's consciousness, he began to understand the enormous scope of the project ahead. This would not be a simple boat, but a floating preserve of life itself, designed to survive catastrophe beyond human imagination. The construction would require years of labor and resources that seemed impossible to gather. "The length will be 300 cubits, the voice continued, each specification burning itself into Noah's memory. "The breadth 50 cubits, the height 30 cubits. Make a window and finish the ark within a cubit above. Set the door in the side and make it with lower, second, and third stories." Noah's builder's mind began to visualize the structure being described. This would be unlike any ship ever constructed, designed not for speed or maneuverability, but for survival during conditions that would destroy every other vessel on Earth. The ark would need to be completely self-contained, capable of supporting life for periods that stretched beyond normal endurance. "Two of every sort will come to you to be kept alive," the divine voice explained. Of clean beasts, take 7 pairs. Of birds, take 7 pairs. Of everything that creeps upon the earth, take 2 of every sort. Food for all of them you must gather and store. The logistics of this task staggered Noah's imagination. He would need to become expert in the care and feeding of creatures from every corner of creation. His ark would have to accommodate animals with vastly different needs, from the smallest insects to the largest beasts. The food requirements alone would demand storage capacity that seemed impossible to achieve. Yet, even as the challenges mounted in his mind, Noah felt strength flowing into his spirit. This was divine calling, not human planning. The one who commanded the task would also provide the means to accomplish it. Faith would supply what reason could not calculate. When will this judgment come? Noah asked, needing to understand the timeline for his preparations. I give the earth 120 years, came the reply. Time for repentance, time for warning, time for you to complete your work. After that, I will bring the flood upon the earth to destroy all flesh that has the breath of life under heaven. 120 years. More than many lifetimes. Yet Noah sensed it would barely be enough for the work ahead. He would need to gather materials, recruit workers who could be trusted with such a project, and somehow manage the countless details required to preserve life itself through global catastrophe. Go, the divine voice commanded, as its presence began to fade from the valley. Begin the work I have given you. Be faithful in small things, and I will entrust you with greater. Remember that you carry the hope of all creation. As silence returned to the vineyard, Noah remained on his knees among the grapevines, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his calling. Around him, the peaceful valley continued its ancient rhythms, unaware that it had just witnessed the beginning of the greatest rescue mission in history. When he finally rose and walked back toward his house, Noah's steps carried new purpose. Tomorrow he would begin gathering the materials for an ark that would save the world. Tonight, he would pray for strength to be worthy of the trust that the Most High had placed in him. Collapse of the giant's reign. The first crack in the giant's dominion appeared on a morning when the sun rose pale and distant. Oya, mightiest of the Nephilim, stood atop his tower of human bones and felt something he had never experienced before. Weakness crept through his massive frame like frost spreading across still water. His supernatural strength, which had once allowed him to crush mountains with his bare hands, now flickered like a dying flame. When he reached for a boulder to hurl at a fleeing band of humans, his fingers barely moved the stone. The power that had defined his existence was draining away drop by precious drop. The other giants felt it too. Hahya's roar of fury shook the earth, but the sound carried less force than it had just days before. Mahes discovered that his speed had slowed, his movements becoming clumsy where they had once been fluid as water. The supernatural gifts that had made them gods among mortals were fading like memories of forgotten dreams. At first, they blamed each other for their condition. Ancient rivalries that had simmered beneath their cooperation now erupted into open warfare. Brother turned against brother in battles that scarred the landscape for miles around. Their weakened blows still carried enough force to shatter cities, but each clash left them more drained than before. The Watchers, bound in chains of divine making, could offer no guidance to their troubled offspring. Shemahaza writhed in his supernatural bonds, watching helplessly as his carefully constructed kingdom crumbled. Azazel's rage burned cold in his prison, but his fury could not reach beyond the barriers that held him. Humans who had cowered before the giants for generations began to notice the change. A merchant, brave enough to approach a giant feeding ground, found the massive forms moving more slowly, their terrible appetites seeming less urgent. Word spread through the survivor networks with the speed of wildfire. The Titans were growing weak. Small acts of defiance began to appear across the giant-controlled territories. A shepherd refused to surrender his flock when a giant demanded it. A village elder stood firm when ordered to provide human sacrifices. These brave souls discovered that the giants' responses lacked their former devastating swiftness. The weakening accelerated as divine judgment continued its relentless work. Powers that had seemed permanent as mountains revealed themselves to be temporary gifts that could be withdrawn. The giants found themselves trapped in bodies that grew heavier with each passing day. their immortal essence slowly bleeding away. Hunger drove them to desperate measures. Giants who had once feasted on human flesh by choice now consumed anything they could find merely to survive. They devoured entire forests, stripped hillsides bare of vegetation, and drained lakes in futile attempts to satisfy appetites that no earthly substance could fill. Their desperation led to increasingly erratic behavior. Some giants turned to cannibalism, attacking their own kind with the same savagery they had once reserved for humans. Others simply collapsed where they stood, their massive forms becoming landmarks that would endure long after their spirits had departed. The infrastructure of giant civilization began to crumble as its builders lost the strength to maintain their impossible constructions. Towers built from human bones toppled in earthquakes that their creators could no longer control. Bridges spanning vast canyons collapsed as the supernatural forces holding them together dissipated. Human survivors emerged from hiding places they had occupied for generations. They crept through ruins that had once been giant strongholds, salvaging what they could from the wreckage of a reign that had seemed eternal. The taste of freedom felt strange on tongues that had known only fear. But freedom came with its own challenges. The world the giants left behind bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before their rise. Landscapes had been reshaped by their conflicts. Rivers had been diverted to serve their needs. Entire regions lay barren from their feeding frenzies. The surviving humans faced the task of rebuilding civilization from fragments scattered across a transformed world. Many had forgotten skills that had once been common knowledge. The arts of agriculture, construction, and governance required rediscovery by people who had focused purely on survival for generations. Some human communities had maintained their knowledge and skills in secret enclaves. These became centers of renewal, sharing their preserved wisdom with refugees who arrived with nothing but hope. Teachers emerged who could remind people how to plant crops, build homes, and form governments based on law rather than force. The process of rebuilding revealed how thoroughly the giants' influence had penetrated human society. Tools and weapons created using the Watchers' forbidden knowledge continued to function, but their users often discovered that the supernatural benefits came with hidden costs. Swords that never dulled might drink their wielder's life force. Armor that turned aside any blow could trap its wearers in prisons of their own making. Many communities chose to abandon these enhanced technologies entirely, returning to simpler methods that aligned with natural law. They melted down supernatural weapons to forge ordinary tools. They dismantled buildings constructed with giant techniques, preferring structures that human hands could understand and maintain. Trade routes that had connected distant regions began to reopen as travelers found they could journey without fear of being harvested by roaming giants. Merchants ventured forth with goods that communities had learned to create using traditional methods. Markets sprang up in places where giants had once held their feeding grounds. Languages evolved rapidly during this period of renewal. Many words associated with the giant era were deliberately forgotten, while new terms arose to describe the work of rebuilding. Poetry and song returned to human culture, but the melodies carried undertones of sorrow for all that had been lost. Religious practices experienced revival as communities sought to understand what had saved them from complete destruction. Temples were rebuilt using stones salvaged from giant ruins. Altars were rededicated to the worship of the Most High, whose intervention had broken the power of the Titans. But the work of rebuilding went slowly. Generations of human knowledge had been lost during the giant years. Techniques that had once been common practice now required painstaking rediscovery. Simple tasks like organizing large construction projects or maintaining extensive irrigation systems challenged communities that had forgotten how such things were accomplished. The giants themselves became something between memory and legend, even as their massive corpses still dotted the landscape. Children born after the collapse heard stories of the Titans that seemed too fantastic to believe. The human mind struggled to accept that such beings had ever walked the earth. Some survivors gathered the bones of fallen giants, using them as foundations for monuments that would remind future generations of the price of corruption. Others simply avoided the places where giants had fallen, allowing nature to slowly reclaim the sites of former horror. New forms of art emerged that helped people process their experiences. Painters created works that captured both the terror of the giant years and the hope of renewal. Sculptors shaped figures that embodied the resilience of human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. The collapse of the giants' reign marked more than just the end of their physical dominion. It represented the failure of power based purely on strength and appetite. The Titans had possessed every advantage except the one that ultimately mattered: alignment with the divine will that governed all creation. As human communities grew stronger and more organized, they began to establish new forms of government based on justice rather than might. Leaders emerged who served their people instead of demanding service from them. Laws were written that protected the weak rather than empowering the strong. Yet, even as humanity celebrated its liberation from giant tyranny, thoughtful observers noticed troubling signs. The corruption that had enabled the Titans' rise had not been completely eliminated. Seeds of the old evil remained scattered throughout the world, waiting for conditions that might allow them to sprout once again. The collapse of the giants' reign was complete, but the world they left behind remained wounded in ways that would take generations to heal. The work of rebuilding would continue for many years, and the memory of what had been lost would linger even longer. Noah's calling. In the quiet valley where morning dew still fell pure upon uncontaminated grass, Noah worked his fields with the patient rhythm of seasons uncounted. His hands, weathered by honest labor, guided the plow along furrows that his father and grandfather had cut before him. The earth here responded to his touch as it had since creation's dawn, yielding grain that tasted of sunshine and rain, unmarked by corruption. The vineyard he tended produced fruit that carried the essence of joy itself. When neighbors gathered to share the wine he crafted, their hearts grew light and their voices rose in songs that remembered better days. Noah's gentle guidance had preserved this pocket of creation's original intent, a sanctuary where life still followed the patterns set by divine wisdom. His family worked alongside him in the golden afternoon light. His wife, Naamah, moved between the vegetable rows with grace that made even simple tasks appear to be forms of worship. Their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, had grown into men who carried their father's righteousness like inherited treasure. Shem showed particular skill with the animals that grazed in their protected meadows. Creatures that fled from human presence elsewhere would approach him without fear, sensing the peace that surrounded Noah's household. Ham possessed hands that could coax life from the most stubborn seeds, while Japheth crafted tools and furnishings with artistry that rivaled the work of master craftsmen. The family maintained traditions that connected them to the faith of their ancestors. Each morning began with prayers offered to the Most High. Each evening closed with thanksgiving for blessings received. Their lives moved in harmony with rhythms that had governed righteous households since the world's youth. But Noah carried burdens that his peaceful exterior could not entirely conceal. His prophetic sight showed him visions that disturbed his sleep and shadowed his days. He saw darkness spreading across the earth like ink through water, corruption advancing despite the giant's fall. The cleansing of creation remained incomplete. On the evening when everything changed, Noah walked alone among his vines as stars emerged in a sky that seemed closer than usual. The air itself felt charged with expectancy, as if all creation held its breath. Even the insects fell silent, their constant chirping replaced by a quiet that pressed against his ears. The voice came not as thunder or earthquake, but as a gentle whisper that filled the entire valley. Yet Noah recognized it instantly, for it carried the same tone that had spoken light into darkness at creation's dawn. This was the voice of the Most High, speaking directly to mortal ears as he had not done for generations. Noah, the voice called, and his name sounded like music composed before time began. Noah, servant of righteousness, keeper of the ancient ways. Noah fell to his knees among the grapevines, their leaves rustling around him like whispered prayers. "I am here, Lord," he replied, his voice trembling with awe and reverence. "Your servant listens." "The earth grows corrupt beyond healing," the divine voice continued, each word carrying weight that pressed upon Noah's spirit. "Violence fills the hearts of men. The thoughts of their hearts are evil continually. Every imagination of their thoughts is only evil all the time. Noah's prophetic sight suddenly expanded, showing him visions of the world beyond his protected valley. He saw cities where humans practiced the forbidden arts learned from the Watchers. He witnessed rituals that opened doorways to realms that should have remained sealed. He observed the casual cruelty that had become humanity's normal way of existing. The giants are fallen, the voice acknowledged, but their corruption remains. It spreads through human hearts like poison through veins. Soon it will reach even the places that now seem pure. The truth of these words settled upon Noah like a physical weight. His own valley, his carefully maintained sanctuary, would not remain untouched forever. The growing darkness would eventually reach even here, transforming this last bastion of righteousness into something unrecognizable. "What would you have me do, Lord?" Noah asked, though part of him already sensed the magnitude of what was coming. "I will destroy all flesh," came the reply, the words carrying both infinite sorrow and absolute determination. "I will wash the earth clean with waters that will cover even the highest mountains. Nothing that breathes air will survive, except what I preserve through your obedience." Noah's mind reeled at the scope of what was being revealed. This would not be a local judgment affecting one region or nation, but a cleansing that would encompass the entire world. Every human settlement, every corrupt practice, every trace of the Watchers' influence would be swept away in a flood of divine justice. "But you have found grace in my eyes," the voice continued, and warmth filled the words like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You and your household will be saved. Through you, the world will begin again." The responsibility of this calling overwhelmed Noah's mind. He would carry the future of all creation in his hands, serving as the bridge between the corrupted age that was ending and the renewed world that would follow. The weight of such a task seemed beyond human capacity to bear. "I will tell you how to build a vessel," the divine voice explained. "It will be large enough to carry your family and representatives of every kind of living thing. Make it from gopher wood. Cover it within and without with pitch. Divide it into rooms and stories according to the pattern I will show you." As the instructions flowed through Noah's consciousness, he began to understand the enormous scope of the project ahead. This would not be a simple boat, but a floating preserve of life itself, designed to survive catastrophe beyond human imagination. The construction would require years of labor and resources that seemed impossible to gather. "The length will be 300 cubits," the voice continued, each specification burning itself into Noah's memory. "The breadth, 50 cubits, the height 30 cubits. Make a window and finish the ark within a cubit above. Set the door in the side and make it with lower, second, and third stories." Noah's builder's mind began to visualize the structure being described. This would be unlike any ship ever constructed, designed not for speed or maneuverability, but for survival during conditions that would destroy every other vessel on Earth. The Ark would need to be completely self-contained, capable of supporting life for periods that stretch beyond normal endurance. "Two of every sort will come to you to be kept alive," the divine voice explained. "Of clean beasts take 7 pairs. Of birds take 7 pairs. Of everything that creeps upon the earth, take 2 of every sort. Food for all of them you must gather and store." The logistics of this task staggered Noah's imagination. He would need to become expert in the care and feeding of creatures from every corner of creation. His ark would have to accommodate animals with vastly different needs, from the smallest insects to the largest beasts. The food requirements alone would demand storage capacity that seemed impossible to achieve. Yet, even as the challenges mounted in his mind, Noah felt strength flowing into his spirit. This was divine calling, not human planning. The one who commanded the task would also provide the means to accomplish it. Faith would supply what reason could not calculate. "When will this judgment come?" Noah asked, needing to understand the timeline for his preparations. "I give the earth 120 years, came the reply. "Time for repentance, time for warning, time for you to complete your work. After that, I will bring the flood upon the earth to destroy all flesh that has the breath of life under heaven." 120 years, more than many lifetimes. Yet Noah sensed it would barely be enough for the work ahead. He would need to gather materials, recruit workers who could be trusted with such a project, and somehow manage the countless details required to preserve life itself through global catastrophe. Go, the divine voice commanded as its presence began to fade from the valley. Begin the work I have given you. Be faithful in small things, and I will entrust you with greater. Remember that you carry the hope of all creation. As silence returned to the vineyard, Noah remained on his knees among the grapevines, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his calling. Around him, the peaceful valley continued its ancient rhythms, unaware that it had just witnessed the beginning of the greatest rescue mission in history. When he finally rose and walked back toward his house, Noah's steps carried new purpose. Tomorrow, he would begin gathering the materials for an ark that would save the world. Tonight, he would pray for strength to be worthy of the trust that the Most High had placed in him.